Chapter 598. The afterglow of destruction gushed out from the stone sword and went straight forward, tearing the darkness apart and converging into a terrifying line. It was as if the entire sky was divided into two ends, piercing the limit of the end of hell, and even sinking into the deepest part of the abyss. A ray of remnant light flashed and disappeared. It brushed past Weischer's cheek and flew past. Following that, a terrifying faint wind erupted and set Weischer's clothes on fire. His entire upper body seemed to have turned into charcoal, and his skin cracked and shattered. But soon, the cracked skin healed again, and the flames dissipated, and he was whole again. Weischer was still moving forward. He was unharmed. At the last moment, Liz finally made her choice. Her spine was bent by exhaustion, and she gasped for breath with difficulty. But she couldn't help but roar at the air in front of her. So annoying! Like an angry child, the stone sword in his hand that was full of cracks slashed randomly, leaving behind extremely unpleasant cracks on the ground. "You bastards! Why? What the hell are you doing? Can't I save you?" But she couldn't dispel the illusions that had long dissipated. It was as if she couldn't wake up the dead. She couldn't even lift their collars and beat them up. But why did you stand on the side of that bastard? Liz closed her eyes. Weischer stopped beside her and looked at her quietly until she finally calmed down and wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes. "Thank you." He thanked her solemnly. What answered him was a raised middle finger. Liz didn't even want to look back at him. She just said goodbye coldly. "Go to hell, scumbag." Weischer froze in place for a long time. He didn't know what he did to anger her again. After a long time, he nodded with a bitter smile. "Okay." He looked at the silent, huge palace in front of him. "I'll go now." They said goodbye. The two of them brushed past each other. Weischer reached out and pushed open the last door in front of him. The rusty metal rubbed against each other, producing a sharp sound. But soon, the sound was swallowed up by the tide that surged out from behind the door. The endless pain, despair, and resentment that had accumulated over a long period of time whizzed out of the door amidst the wails that had been sealed for tens of thousands of years. The viscous darkness engulfed everything in an instant. The entire eternal frost furnace began to violently shake. This was because as the great door opened, a torrent of darkness gushed out from the depths of the seal. The beautiful illusion of heaven was torn apart at this moment, along with the terrifying tremors of the twilight village. Endless darkness rushed into the sky and spread over the world. The hatred that had settled down for thousands of years formed a mighty tide that descended from the sky and quickly swallowed everything. It caused everything within sight to be completely transformed into a dark and despairing realm. When despair persisted for an endless period of time, what kind of crazy curses would be born from it? And when all the people in hell were tortured to the end of time, what kind of terrifying calamity would be formed? This was the true source of power for the eternal frost furnace, the never-failing fountain of pain. After tens of thousands of years of accumulation, it formed a sea of despair. Now, the box of calamity had been opened. What leaked out was only a tiny bit of radiation from the furnace's operation. But the endless curses were enough to cause the entire hell to begin to dissolve. A frenzied shriek rang out in Weischer's ears. Countless ferocious and crazed faces appeared from the dark ocean. They gradually wanted to reach out and pull him along with them into this endless despair. They had long gone crazy. They couldn't tell what was salvation and what was relief. What remained was no longer the will of the past, but a remnant soul that had been completely distorted and destroyed in the eternal darkness and pain. In the hall, there was a black sea that was so vast that its edges couldn't be seen. Along with the breaking of the condensed shell, the souls that had been silent for a long time once again awakened from the pain. They wailed in pain and cursed everything. The asphalt-like sea churned violently, almost overflowing from behind the door. But everything was pulled by countless rusty chains, sealed and imprisoned in this cage. Even if the door had been opened, it didn't allow them to take a step towards freedom. Countless phantom-like chains crisscrossed in the hall and finally gathered in one place. They wrapped around a broken armor full of cracks. That was the miraculous crystallization that truly belonged to the makers. It gathered all the beautiful wishes and hopes of the former Twilight Village and created a management machine for the upcoming Kingdom of Heaven, the final painstaking effort of the Sunmaker, the forging above all forging, the atom who reclaimed the future in the paradise. Master Control Center, Gear Emperor. Unfortunately, from the moment it was born, it was no longer a paradise that welcomed it, but a hell formed by endless despair. In feudal resistance, it was controlled by the Hell Workshop Masters and even became the control center of the Eternal Frost Furnace. But this last bit of persistence still protected the last bit of rationality in pain and torture. In the War of All Worlds, this hatred turned into a dagger and stabbed into the hearts of the Hell Workshop Masters from the back to avenge their compatriots. From then on, it ushered in endless waiting and despair day after day, year after year. The heavily injured Gear Emperor was still guarding his throne, guarding those people who gradually went crazy in pain and darkness, guarding his hometown that had nothing but despair until the end of time. Now, after an endless period of time, the door was opened once again. Behind the broken faceplate of the Gear Emperor, the silent skeleton raised its head with difficulty. It looked at the source of the glow. It saw the young man. Its empty eyes seemed to be illuminated by illusory hope. "Nice to meet you, Sunmaker." Huaishur bowed solemnly. "Thank you for your guidance and expectations all this time. Following your call and request, I'm here to kill you." At that moment, Huaishur drew his sword and moved forward, ignoring the erosion of endless despair. He walked into this sea of curses almost foolishly. He was seeking his own death. In the violent turbulence, the sound of cracking came from the tower. The cabin in the forest raised its head in shock and saw a heavy building like a mountain falling from the sky, triggering a chain reaction. A violent roar burst out from the distance. In the midst of staggering running, he suddenly tripped. Originally, a rank 3 sublimata shouldn't encounter such a ridiculous thing at all. But now, he couldn't step over that small step and staggered to the ground. He wanted to gasp for breath, but he felt that he couldn't breathe. There were too many disasters and too much despair. It made everything in his nightmares become a reality. Such a terrifying degree of despair and curses was no longer something he could adapt to. His overly sharp perception made him feel suffocated in the crazy collapse at this moment. Only the cage of dreams in his arms had a bit of warmth, emitting a soft halo, allowing him to barely maintain his consciousness. Continue to flee. The entire Twilight Village began to collapse in the turbulence. Cracks and ruins were everywhere as far as the eye could see. He didn't even know where to escape to. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have peed. Lin Shurjo retreated and wanted to hang himself. Would it kill him to hold it in for a while? Otherwise, how could he have been separated from the main group and fled in this collapsing hell by himself? He didn't know how many times he wanted to connect to the Iron Crystal Constellation, but the walkie-talkie was always mixed with that kind of wailing noise. Under the distortion of the curse, black blood kept seeping out. It turned into a sinister piece of flesh, opened its mouth, and bit at his neck. Lin Shurjo screamed and threw away the walkie-talkie in a panic. But then he realized that it was his last glimmer of hope. Now, that glimmer of hope fell into a crack in the ground. "It's over, it's all over." "Teacher, Save me. He wanted to cry, but had no tears. He wanted to find someone in the sudden storm. Anyone was good. Even if they died together, it was better than being alone on the road. Just as he was in complete despair, he saw a flickering light appear in the countless pitch-black precipices of despair, illuminating the outline within. A temporary shelter, that shape, it was the standard survival shelter of the Astronomical Society. The cabin in the forest was so surprised that he almost screamed. He got up and used his last strength to rush into the light of the shelter and knocked on the door. Open the door. Open the door. Help. The door was slightly opened, but it quickly closed after he impatiently went in. Lynn Sergio was so moved that he was about to cry. Before he could get up, he began to shout, "Thank you, brother. Thank you, sister. Thank you, uncle. Thank you, auntie. Thank you," without waiting for him to finish thanking. He froze in place. Under a dim light, a temporary operating table was illuminated. There was an old man on the operating table with 80% of his body burned, and a middle-aged man in a flowery coat who was the chief surgeon for emergency treatment. And at the door, there was a man with a cold expression. In a long period of sluggishness, Lynn Sergio swallowed stiffly. He knew them, or every student on the Iron Crystal Constellation was forced to make up lessons and knew them. Pandalong, Harley Quinn, and the Colonel. They were the troop. He actually got into the nest of the troop, but immediately he realized that he wasn't wearing the protective suit of the Iron Crystal Constellation. In other words, as long as he didn't let them know without waiting for his luck to rise in his heart, it was torn apart by the old voice on the operating table. "I remember. He seems to be the student of that bastard. Why, sure." The chief surgeon, Harley Quinn, looked back and leaned closer. He pinched his chin and looked carefully. He nodded. "Yes, that's right. When he was in prison, he especially showed it to me. He also said how powerful and cute his students were. If I meet them in the future, I must take care of them. You are the younger one. I remember you." Lynn Sergio felt like he was struck by lightning. He was so angry that he almost cried. He didn't know whether he should first distinguish whether he was Weischer's student or discuss with them. He was the first to enter, so he should be the older one. "Moreover, teacher, how much do you want me to be a traitor? Look at it now. It's over." Without waiting for him to do anything, the colonel suddenly reached out and hit him on the back of his head. He felt dizzy. The cage of dreams in his arms fell to the ground and lost its divine power. Then 3 portable small seals were placed on Lynn Sergio and shackled him with source substance shackles. "You are so lucky." On the operating table, Pandalong lowered his head and looked at him. A sinister smile appeared on his burned face. "We were just reduced to this state because of your teacher. I didn't expect his student to come to us on his own accord. Guess, if he knows that his student is in our hands, how much will he regret?" Lynn Sergio sat stiffly on the ground, only feeling despair. But often, when you feel that you have fallen to the bottom of the valley, there will be a deeper despair to remind you, dream on. Outside of the sanctuary, a familiar voice was heard. "Little Sergio! Little Sergio!" It was Yuan Yuan's voice. "Where are you? Can you hear me?" In the quiet shelter, the colonel and Harley Quinn looked at each other. Not only one of them sighed, faintly. "We are so lucky." 10 minutes later, Isabella put a cup of hot cocoa in front of Yuan Yuan and handed her a blanket. "You are so lucky to be able to come here. The nearest shelter is at least 10 kilometers away from here." The mature woman also rummaged through the cupboard in the shelter and found a jar of nuts. She shook it in front of Lynn Sergio. "Do you want some?" Lynn Sergio sat on the chair and shook his head awkwardly under Yuan Yuan's angry stare. "Relax a little, Pandalong. That old bastard likes to scare people. Isabella shook her head and sighed, comforting, no matter what, we are all teachers. Although you are not Ivy League students, we will not fall to the point of making an issue out of you. After drinking, eat something, and sleep for a while. It is okay to wait for your teacher to take you back. She paused, looked up at the tower outside the window, and the endless sea of despair from the tower. She could not help but shrug. If he is still alive after the emergency operation, Harley Quinn threw away his gloves, came over, and carefully looked at them. It was like going to the zoo to see monkeys. It was as rare as it could be. Are you really Weischer's students? He was a little incredulous. You don't look like it. Lynn Sergio could not help but roll his eyes. Teacher is such a reckless person in the world. If other people want to learn from him, they would have died a long time ago. Harley Quinn's expression suddenly became strange. He shrugged and did not speak, but Pan DeLong on the operating table raised his eyes. Reckless? Maybe you are right about this. That bastard always makes people feel that he deserved to die, but it should not be just that. He glanced at Yuan and then at Lynn Sergio, becoming more and more dissatisfied. Although I don't know what he taught you, you did not learn the best part of him. Boy, there is a fundamental difference between you. Is he not a good teacher, or are you not a good student? Hearing this, Yuan's eyes became cold. When she was about to open her mouth to speak, she was stopped by Lynn Sergio next to her. Old man, quickly take a rest after the injection. Don't waste your time. Little House in the Woods waved his hand indifferently. Do you think this kind of trick will work on the Lynn family? Lynn family? Pan DeLong frowned and suddenly understood. Who is Deer in the Woods to you? Fourth brother. What about Care in the Woods? Sister 12. Then it makes sense. No wonder he doesn't look like a good student. But I am still curious. The old man frowned and looked over. Why did you ask him to be your teacher? Little House in the Woods rolled his eyes and retorted unhappily, I like it. It's none of your business. You can think of it as an occupational disease of a dean. Since it has become an established fact, it doesn't matter what the reason is. Pan DeLong pondered for a moment, nodded slowly, and suddenly said, Then just take it as me asking a question. Behind the layers of bandages, the old man raised his head and looked in the direction of the young man, suddenly asked, Mr. Lynn, in your opinion, does a sublimator need a teacher? Lynn Sergio looked at him blankly, stunned. He didn't understand what he meant. Only then did he realize that he had never considered this question before. You've realized it now, right? Pan DeLong seemed to smile. For a sublimator, do they really need a teacher? Sublimators aren't born from knowledge, and they don't need knowledge either. Not to mention how many of them are illiterate. If they want to continue growing, the only thing they need is the formula to advance. But there are so many paths to sublimation in the world and countless kinds of stigmata. Now that the Astronomy Club has announced it, there are so many people who can buy the Complete Paths formula on the market. As long as you have the money, is it that hard to buy it? Tricks, secret instruments, these can all be bought with money. In the collection of all sins, you can even buy things that the Astronomy Club doesn't allow. The so-called inheritance was already determined when you chose the stigmata, or even earlier, long before you were born. I remember that the Lin family has noble blood in Dongsha. They also inherited the sacred name of Illuminator, right? Born in such a family, do you really need a teacher? Do you need a teacher who has nothing to do with your genealogy and path? Lin Sergio didn't say anything. He didn't know how to answer. If you became his student because of your family's arrangement, then I can conclude that you still don't understand the expectations of your family's elders. In the hut in the forest, you neglected the essentials. He stared at the boy and said seriously, You never saw the most sincere ray of light in the darkness. The youth opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but was interrupted by Pan DeLong. Listen carefully, you little bastard. On the operating table, the feeble old man widened his eyes and said with an unquestionable solemn tone, "The purpose of your teacher's existence is not to teach you how to obtain power, but to be a pioneer. To show you the reason why you should use power and how to use this power. I will tell you what a beautiful future this power will bring you." Isabella stood up and tried to hold him down. Because his voice was too loud, it tore the wound and caused blood to seep out from under the bandages. But Pan DeLong didn't care. Under the layers of bandages and gauze, a trace of sadness appeared in his cloudy eyes. "Little brat, I loathe your teacher from the bottom of my heart, and I even loathe all of you, but I have no way to deny how precious his determination is. I also don't wish for you, as a student, to see your teacher as a frivolous and impetuous fellow, even if that fellow is indeed a complete bastard." In the silence, he raised his eyes and looked at the collapsing tower outside the window. He couldn't help but sigh in frustration. "Look up, Mr. Lin, like your classmates, and witness all of this," he said tiredly. "This is the most important lesson in your life, and there won't be a second precious experience. Don't move your eyes away. Your teacher is walking on the path he opened up, and he is showing you how to become a sublimator, how to become a hero." Along with his words, a wisp of solemn, pure white rose from the dark sky. It was so bright. There was light. Chapter 599. At this moment, the bridge of the Iron Crystal constellation was filled with shrill alarms, and the error pop-up windows were stacked in scarlet red. The moment Huaisher pushed open the door, the entire Twilight Village was on the verge of collapse. If not for the dome giant constantly repairing it, it would have fallen apart by now. But now, the curse and despair were like an ocean, drowning the entire world inch by inch. Almost all the observation devices were screaming at the highest volume allowed by the appearance settings. The communications manager was about to go deaf from the reports of his subordinates. "Warning! The depth of the area is rising. 14, 15, 20, depth of 20. The final depth of the center is 23. It has reached the theoretical limit. The black box of the tower area is complete, but it can't be sealed for too long. The melting of hell is accelerating. The estimated time has increased from 6 hours to 4 hours. The mess of bad news almost blocked his ears, but the communications manager really hoped that he could block it so that he would not have to listen to the rest. Where's Huaisher? He pushed up his glasses and asked, "Is he still alive?" His biological signal is unstable, but his functions can still be maintained. This was a blessing in disguise. The communications manager looked at the vitals displayed on the screen and did not know whether to breathe a sigh of relief or worry. Unbelievable. How could he still be alive in this state? Wasn't this too much? An ordinary ascender would have long since been corrupted into some unknown creature after being soaked in such an environment with such an exaggerated concentration of curse energy. How could they still be able to move and breathe like they were now? Just how bad was the situation inside? What about the image? He raised his voice. "Send the image from inside. The accuracy is insufficient. The people from the mechanical department are urgently changing the scope. No, the depth interference is too great. I don't care what you change. It doesn't matter even if you change the head. Hurry up and solve the problem." Even with the Iron Crystal constellation's amazing technology and efficiency, it still took a full 5 minutes to peel off the noise and interference caused by the deep plunge and display the situation inside on the screen. It was a boiling ocean, amidst the never-ending wails. The darkness was surging in a viscous manner. It wanted to stir up a raging tide, but it was unable to break free from its shackles. There were sounds of praying and screams, but most of them were hollow wails that had long since become numb. The sea of calamity created by the remnant spirits churned rapidly. Countless limbs stretched out from the sea and pulled at Huaisher's body in a frenzy. It wanted to pull him into the depths of the darkness. When he was outside the door, they could not affect Huaisher, but once Huaisher walked in, there was no protection to speak of. He was stuck in a quagmire, unable to extricate himself. The sound of chains snapping could be heard continuously. The rusty seal could no longer imprison those crazed spirit souls. Darkness spread, and countless afterimages enveloped Huaisher's body. The further he went, the more he could feel himself being corroded and assimilated. It feels ice cold and quite refreshing. Panting heavily, Huaisher squeezed out a smile with difficulty, but the smile was not much better than crying. Beneath his feet, the turbulent ocean continued to tremble. Countless deformed limbs continuously stretched out from it, pulling at his body. Strands of darkness spread out from where they pulled at him like a spider web, climbing up his neck and covering his face. It was a curse born from despair, the essence condensed from pain, and the records carried by the fragments of the spirit souls. And their fragmented records and memories, every time they touched him, Huaisher would empathize with them and experience everything that had happened to them. Everything that had happened to them before would repeat itself on Huaisher. It would trample on his soul. It was as if his soul had split apart again, splitting into thousands of himself, constantly experiencing the pain that was engraved in this sea of darkness. It was as if everything that had happened in the myriad heavenly sphere was repeating itself. But this time, there was no struggle or redemption, no satisfaction or end. There was only endless despair and pain. The more he struggled, the deeper he sank into the quagmire. Even if he tried his best to climb, he could not stop the viscous darkness from creeping up his neck. He was losing strength, bit by bit, being pulled into the sea of darkness. On the iron crystal seat, there was an angry roar. It was the great Grandmaster. "What's going on, Russell?" The great Grandmaster stared at the projection in the teaching and research room. "You didn't tell me about this. What's going on?" In the observation, Huaisher was being eroded and assimilated by the records of hell at a speed thousands of times faster than ordinary people, falling toward the end of solidification. The speed was too fast, so fast that it was unbelievable. It was as if he had no resistance to it at all. "It's just an affinity physique," Russell said. "He himself is the best carrier of the Abyss records. It's just that the degree of affinity is a bit too much. It's not something to be surprised about, is it?" The great Grandmaster was in disbelief. "Why didn't you say such an important thing earlier?" Russell held the teacup and replied calmly, "You didn't ask either, did you?" But no matter how righteous and confident he looked, his mood was by no means as calm as he appeared to be. The teacup in his hand had been held for a long time. It was already close to his mouth, but he had forgotten to drink it. He just stared straight at the scene transmitted to him on the screen. He couldn't take his eyes off it. In his other hand, he was still holding the emergency recall switch, but he still couldn't make up his mind to use the last insurance. Just a little bit more, just a little bit more. He couldn't help but move closer, as if his whole body was about to stick to the screen. He watched Huaisher's final struggle. He was looking forward to a miracle, but at that moment, Huaisher's movements suddenly stopped for a moment. His eyes widened, and his outstretched palm stiffened in the air. Then it was completely covered by the viscous sea of darkness. There was no trace of him anymore. On the tower, the pure white remnant light quickly faded and was torn apart by the wailing sound. Hell was engulfed by darkness. In the dead silence, only the restless snowflakes and the scarlet warning were left on the big screen of the iron crystal seat. Signal interrupted. "Russell," the Grand Master roared. "What are you waiting for?" "Wait a little longer." Russell unconsciously moved closer and stared at the screen in front of him. "Wait a little longer. It's not time to give up yet." On the teacup in his hand, cracks gradually appeared. The torturous silence came. Only the ticking of the second hand could be heard echoing in the room. Huaisher felt that he was about to melt, like a sugar cube falling into ink. The existence of his soul gradually thinned, but the pain became clearer and clearer, purely reflected in every part of his nerves. But he doubted whether there were any nerves in his body now. It was as if thousands of him had fallen into thousands of different hells at the same time, receiving different kinds of pain. He wanted to struggle, but he couldn't resist the gravity of this sea of darkness. Even though he kept trying to awaken the sacred mark, young Arbiter Ming was gradually unable to respond to his will. The miracle was far away from him. There was too much despair, as if he had watched countless children die prematurely. The sanctuary of bones that sheltered the last of his consciousness had begun to crack. It was about to collapse in the fall. The light of the Sword of Virtue was rapidly dimming, and it could no longer resist the erosion of despair, falling apart. The last straw was broken. It was just the last bit. Huaisher wanted to laugh bitterly, but he didn't even have the strength to laugh. In the darkness, he closed his eyes. He just wanted to sigh. Stupid. Huaisher, no one will come to save you this time. It was a meaningless gamble with his life. In the end, he couldn't save anyone. It was at that moment. A palm emerged from the deepest part of the sea of despair, propping up his back and stopping his fall abruptly. Huaisher looked back in shock and saw a broken face covered by rust in the darkness. Deja vu. That was Myriad Changers. It was indeed the figure he had seen in the subcontrol center, the king of forgers who created countless steel beasts. On the face that was constantly peeling off, a smile appeared. It was like an illusion. Ignoring his broken body, he stretched out his arms and propped Huaisher up. Then another hand stretched out from above and grabbed Huaisher's wrist. "You shouldn't be here. This is not your burial place." The last flame of light was burning on the majestic and ferocious iron face. The forger known as the Constant One was pulling him back from the brink of dissolving. Then he fell apart in the darkness. Then it was the Life Elder. His arms, which were twisted and broken like trees, stretched out from the deepest part of the dark sea, supporting Huaisher's body and rising with difficulty. "Go, stranger, go where you should go." Broken silhouettes appeared one after another in this ocean. The former forgers and kings used their last bit of strength to lift him up from the bottomless depths of despair and move upwards. They wouldn't allow him to fall into such a miserable state. At the moment when they passed by each other, they handed over their last hope and strength to him. In the deepest darkness, there was a light. It illuminated Huaisher's eyes. It was the remnant spirits that had awakened from the eternal dream of despair. They opened their arms and pushed open a small gap in the dark sea. Little by little, they opened up a short path for him. This was the last gratitude left by the countless crazy souls. They offered a meager gift of thanks to the Savior. "Thank you." The illusory voice dissipated in the wails of hell. Huaisher was stunned on the spot. He looked at the small firefly in his palm in disbelief. "Do you see it, Huaisher?" A distant voice sounded in his ear. "In the deepest despair, there is still hope for you." The phantom of the flying bird stared into his eyes and told him, "This is not a coincidence, nor is it a precedent. It has nothing to do with me or anyone else. It is a change brought about by you, a miracle created by you. Other than you, no one else can enjoy such an honor. Everything you've done is not meaningless." Huaishur didn't say anything. It was at that moment that the outline of a sword appeared in the weak firefly. It was burning. From the deepest darkness, it illuminated Huaishur's eyes. It ignited everything, tore apart the deepest sea of darkness, and made all the whales come to an abrupt end. It turned into a raging flame, announcing its existence. A great power emerged from the tiny light. It turned into a torrent and drove away the despair. On the solemn longsword, a sacred emblem was outlined. As if she had finally awakened from a deep sleep, the divinity of the young master of life operated in Huaishur's body. She listened to the countless prayers in despair and received this sacrifice from hell. The will of heaven descended. It was at that moment that a crisp notification sounded from the communication device, breaking the silence of the iron crystal throne. Unknown signal. Connect. The scarlet warning disappeared without a trace. It was replaced by the surging light in the sea of darkness and the wails that tore everything apart. It was a solemn declaration from the end of despair. It gradually turned into thunder and resounded throughout hell. Don't gently walk into that good night. In the turbulent sea of darkness, someone whispered and told everyone, when old, you should burn and roar at sunset. Roar, roar, denounce the retreat of the light. Denounce the disappearance of the light. And so, the sea of despair boiled. It was because the pain could no longer restrain him. Endless waves rose from the squirming darkness, causing them to struggle madly, wanting to flee in panic. It was as if the horn had been blown, revealing the first seal. A thin figure walked out from the darkness. He was burning. He was moving forward. He wore a crown on his head and had a white horse following him. He was going to win. He was going to win again. Russell opened his eyes wide. He subconsciously wanted to drink some water, but the teacup had already been crushed by him. He couldn't hide his loss of composure anymore, but no one paid attention to it anymore. Everyone stared blankly at the screen, at the figure that rose from the darkness like the dawn. It's time for the sun to rise, Russell whispered softly. He grinned. His eyes seemed to be shining and full of expectation. Go and destroy everything, Mr. Jean Valjean. And so, above the sea of darkness, the glorious blade was raised high. It tore apart the dark sky and illuminated the pair of solemn and cold eyes. With all my soul dedicated to this sword, virtue will exist with my legend. Looking down at the sea of despair before him, Huaishur stared at the faces that were numb with pain. He roared with all his might, telling every broken soul in pain, Great Spirit of God, rely on this sword. At this moment, it was as if the will of God had really come in response to Huaishur's vow. It moved on the blade, formed by pure radiance. It descended with mercy and turned it into the axis of all things. Everything should revolve around it. It was declared here. The mighty night ends here. The blade slashed down. The mighty flame moved forward with a bang, causing the turbulent hell to suddenly freeze. The despair and pain that were not worth mentioning dissipated silently under its illumination. The sea of darkness twitched violently and opened up to both sides. It revealed a straight path. From the burning radiance, the solemn white horse neighed and galloped out, crossing the sea of darkness. Endless pain and despair. Sunmaker, today I will save everything. Huaishur looked down at the restrained Gear Emperor and told him, For you, I will bring about extinction. Under the restraint of the throne, the withered face smiled and bowed towards the fate that had already arrived. Layers of armor quickly opened, revealing the heart that was beating with difficulty. There was no more hesitation. In Huaishur's hand, the glorious sword of light pierced down and pierced through the body, completely tearing the heart apart. There was an instant of silence. Then, pure white flames erupted, from top to bottom. It pierced through all obstacles and completely broke the seal of disaster. Endless darkness gushed out from within, burning and spreading in all directions. Quick, 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 quick! On the iron crystal throne, the Grand Master roared, "Everyone move faster! Activate all the secret devices and stabilize the depth. This is the final work." At that moment, the dome giant Atlas raised his face. With a sacred halo above his head, he took a step forward, reached out, and pressed on the eternal frost furnace. Together with Huaishir's actions, from the inside out, this divine artifact that only brought disaster and pain was completely destroyed. After losing the response of the main control center, the broken perpetual motion machine could no longer stop the violent dismantling from the outside world, destroying the form, destroying the composition, breaking the balance, obliterating the miracle. This was the cruelest way of destruction. Without leaving any room for leeway, the eternal frost furnace was completely destroyed. The secret instrument that had already shrouded the entire hell had now turned into a huge alchemy furnace, precisely bringing about the destruction of the tower. Countless fragments fell from the tower, and in the violent explosion, they slowly fell to the ground. It should have been a disaster, but at this moment, there was no sound at all. When the wails that had been lingering here for thousands of years came to an end, what remained was an unbreakable silence. Countless wriggling spirits finally slowly rose from the darkness. With the purification of the secret device, they dissipated into the air. Those wriggling, deformed limbs quickly stiffened under the illumination of the sacred light and fell apart. They dissipated into a handful of dust. There was no more sound. The end of the peace that had been delayed for thousands of years had finally arrived. When the countless dark clouds dispersed, the sky that was full of cracks was revealed. The originally nauseating and dull colors were rapidly fading away. The eternal dusk had completely ended. At the end of the earth, an illusory dawn rose and swallowed everything. It was over. Chapter 600. When the light from the virtuous sword gradually dissipated, the sea of darkness had already disappeared without a trace. Huaishir had personally exterminated it along with the lives of the past. The sound of cracking could be heard from the Gear Emperor. Adam, who had reclaimed the paradise, was finally destroyed along with the infernal realm. The infernal realm quickly collapsed, revealing the decaying body underneath. Huaishir pulled out his sword and sat down on the ground, exhausted. When everything came to an end, he did not feel any sense of relief or relief. Instead, he felt the exhaustion and helplessness that came from the emptiness at the end of the road. "I'm sorry." He lowered his eyes. "I wasn't able to save you. I'm sorry." No one responded. In the silence, he raised his head and gazed at the illusory light that rose and then dissipated. A quiet darkness covered everything. Even in the end, this infernal realm had never been able to welcome the morning sun. This kind of world is too laughable. A hoarse whisper came from behind him. This was the first time Huaishir had heard the Suncaster's voice. He turned around in shock and saw the body on the throne raise its head. It was inconceivable. It had not died yet. It propped up its body with the terrible wound on its chest. It gazed at the infernal realm beneath its feet, gazing at the world it had protected for countless years. Its final homeland. It was unknown whether it was out of nostalgia or mockery, or if it was filled with pain and anger. A blazing light began to shine from the gradually collapsing body. Violent origin substance fluctuations began to surge. A hurricane swept past, causing Huaishir's vision to go dark. He subconsciously raised his hand to block his eyes, and he felt the ruined tower beneath his feet tremble violently. Countless metal particles began to condense from the dust, forming a complex matrix in the Suncaster's hands that began to contract inwards. Immediately afterwards, a new layer appeared, formed, and then contracted inwards. After repeating this process thousands of times, it formed a miniature sun that was constantly fluctuating and burning. It was surrounded by layers of metal, echoing everything in the world, forming a complete structure and outline. This was the Suncaster's forge. Just like the wind lantern that the ever-changing one carried, it was a tool that every forger personally created for themselves. It was a treasure that belonged only to them, a genuine second life. And now, the Sunmaker's furnace had been opened once again. Violent despair emerged from within, turning into a dark green halo that radiated in all directions. Huaisher sucked in a breath of cold air, the scale of despair and curses. He finally knew where the sea of darkness had gone. It was in the hands of the Sunmaker. All the pain and despair of its former clansmen had been swallowed into its stomach. At this moment, intense origin substance fluctuations began to emanate from the secret-like structure. Huaisher's sealing hand could sense a boundless energy, as if a star was revolving in front of him. It was so precise that it seemed to have 100 hands and 1,000 eyes. It was so grand that it seemed to encompass the entire infernal realm. It was actually a miniature eternal frost furnace, a forging furnace that only imprisoned the Sunmaker. An ear-piercing alarm sounded from the iron crystal throne once again. At this moment, the Sunmaker's actions had affected everyone's sensitive nerves, causing them to raise their heads in shock. They nervously and cautiously looked in his direction. Then, after tens of thousands of years, the Sunmaker's forging began once again. Iron, zinc, copper, manganese, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium. Countless elements rose from the shattered twilight village and flowed towards him, entering the miniature sun. Flames rose, engulfing the incomplete body. Immediately after, the ashes and dust scattered, and iron-colored bones appeared, followed by nerves, fascia, internal organs, and even skin. When the flames dissipated, a solemn and cold attire appeared from the past, covering the Sunmaker's body. His pale, metallic hair fluttered in the air, holding the eternal frost furnace, which was formed from despair. The Sunmaker raised his eyes once again. He stared at everything in front of him. A sharp alarm sounded from the iron crystal throne. Warning! Warning! The Sunmaker's threat level is increasing. The communications supervisor stared at the analysis results of the machine in front of him, sweating profusely. At first, it was just a bestower, but then it was promoted to a wearer, and then it naturally broke through to a crown wearer. Then it began to soar again, at an unbelievable speed. In the end, it crossed the dangerous red line and stopped at the most fatal area. Ruler! She had rejected redemption and termination, choosing to truly embrace the abyss and welcome the solidification. After devouring the despair of her people for tens of thousands of years, the last remaining soul of the Sunmaker crossed the most terrifying boundary. Under the blessing of the abyss, she transformed into the supreme ruler. Just her gaze made the hell in front of her tremble. Just by existing, a huge shadow covered the night and dusk. And now, Huaisher sat on the ground and stared at her face. He raised his hand in disbelief and pointed at her face. No. So you're actually a woman? In the silence, the new ruler lowered her eyes and stared at Huaisher in front of her. A trace of doubt appeared in her slender eyes. She began to wonder if there was a problem with this person. Why would he care about such insignificant sexual characteristics? With just a glance, Huaisher's vision turned dark. He felt the shock of his soul. It was as if he was facing the endless sea of despair again. Without saying anything, the Sunmaker raised her palm and pressed it on Huaisher's face. She placed her slender fingers on Huaisher's face and gave it a slight push. Huaisher's vision turned dark, as if a speeding train had slapped him in the face. He couldn't help but fly backward, but his body didn't move. Instead, the young arbiter of life's stigmata in his body was pushed out of Huaisher's body by this simple hand, without any resistance. The huge stigmata unfolded in the void behind Huaisher. Rolling darkness emerged, and the bone burial ground suddenly opened and shrouded. Then it was carefully studied in an instant. After dozens of eras, the existence and technology of the ascended, the principles of the soul and the stigmata, and the existence of divinity. There were no secrets that could be seen through at a glance. That in his panic, Huaisher gradually calmed down. He looked at the Sunmaker in front of him, who was in a daze, and asked tentatively, "Can you let me stand up first? The ground is quite cold. Hello, are you there? Your Excellency, Sunmaker?" She finally looked over, but even though he was facing such a huge existence, unexpectedly, he didn't feel any premonition of death. He just felt a sudden panic in his heart. What does she want to do? "So that's how it is," the Sunmaker murmured softly, and the miniature eternal frost furnace in her hand unfolded again. The condensed darkness of despair turned into a tsunami, once again surging over. It condensed into substance and poured into Huaisher's body, causing turbulence. Under the illumination of the miniature sun, Huaisher's body floated up from the ground, and his eyes widened in confusion. Then he felt a burning sensation coming from his right hand with the hand of confinement. His soul was forcibly materialized. Then some kind of complicated qualitative change that he couldn't understand emerged from his soul. His arm was mutating, fusing with his soul, and unexpectedly, there were traces of iron light. As his skin and muscles disintegrated and floated, countless complex and fine structures were rewoven from them, as if they were being remolded in a furnace. His soul, body, and divine mark were quickly fused together. It formed a furnace structure that was no different from the Sunmaker's. Not only did she help Huaisher complete the fusion of his soul and sacred mark, but she also remodeled a miniature furnace and stuffed it in. In his shock, Huaisher discovered that from now on, he seemed to be able to call himself a Sunmaker. That wasn't all. As if she felt that this kind of work was too simple, the Sunmaker presided over the reconstruction of the furnace with one hand and pressed the sacred mark behind Huaisher with the other hand. The bone burial ground shook with a loud bang and collapsed into endless darkness. She activated the source substance that belonged to Huaisher and integrated it into the brand new furnace formed by the hand of confinement. Then she began to personally demonstrate the peak skills of the Sunmaker to Huaisher. In the past, the biological reconstruction that Myriad Changers was most adept at, the balance scale that Constantine grasped, the nirvana transformation that life form was adept at, and in the end, his own greatest achievement, the all origins return to one. In the blink of an eye, Huaisher felt as if she had experienced the essence of the legacy passed down by the forgers. In fact, from the beginning, Huaisher was already dazzled and couldn't understand the complicated operations. However, the Sunmaker didn't seem to be in the mood to explain to him, and just demonstrated the results and directions of the 13 paths one by one. Huaisher could only rely on the Book of Destiny to forcibly record it down and slowly study it in the future. At this moment, he was like an apprentice who was pulling strings under the guidance of his teacher. He was so exhausted that he was immersed in the forging that he didn't have the time to care about what he was doing. When he finally reacted, the bone burial sanctuary behind him shook with a loud bang and quickly collapsed into countless darkness. From within, the mighty crow tide whizzed out and spread out in all directions. Countless black feathers shook off and were replaced by an icy cold light. It was steel condensed from the ashes of the calamity. The gigantic iron crow spread its wings, revealing countless sharp steel feathers. Under the feathers, there was a body made up of countless complicated machines. Its eyes were like scarlet gems, and its entire body reflected a ferocious metallic light, following the qualitative change and sublimation of the source substance. Under the forging of the furnace, the vast flock of crows underwent a huge change that Huaishur hadn't expected. Holy! The mechanical crows didn't have a trace of uneasiness or confusion about their own changes. They even habitually shouted and jumped around, incomparably excited. Just like that, they spread their wings and soared in the sky of this hell without any protection, unafraid of the terrifying depths and the corrosion of the abyss. When the iron wings collided with each other, dazzling sparks flew out from the friction. Sharp sounds rose and fell one after another, spreading in all directions. "This is a gift for you," a dry voice sounded in front of Huaishur. As if he hadn't spoken for a long time, Sunmaker's voice was monotonous, filled with a stiff and heart-palpitating calmness. When she released her palm, a heavy grayish-black iron ingot appeared in the air and landed in Huaishur's arms. This was the crystallization of despair that flowed out from the heart of the eternal frost furnace, the essence of countless curses and suffering. After taking one last look at Huaishur, she turned around and walked into the distance. "Wait, where are you going?" Huaishur froze in place, ignoring his drowsiness and exhaustion. He subconsciously wanted to pull her back, but his hand landed in the air and grabbed nothing. The lonely figure paused for a moment and told him, "Revenge." Only this word was not unfamiliar, because it had long been engraved in the depths of her soul during the long period of despair. Along with the pain and despair that all her clansmen had suffered, it had become the deepest curse. In front of her, a steel door slowly opened, revealing the endless darkness and terrifying silhouette behind the door. Just like that, the lonely Sunmaker rejected the salvation that was close at hand and walked into the depths of the abyss step by step. She was going to collect a debt of blood from her former enemies. The door slammed shut behind her and disappeared along with her. Everything wasn't over, because there was still a blood feud that had yet to be resolved, but this had nothing to do with Huaishur. He was stunned for a long time before he fell on his back and closed his eyes. He had fallen asleep. Chapter 601. When Huaishur opened his eyes, he saw the ceiling of his dorm room. He felt a wave of surprise. This time, he didn't wake up in a hospital or emergency room. Instead, he was peacefully lying on his own bed. Wasn't there something wrong with it? Could a tool not even stay in a hospital? "Doctor, do you want to check me again?" 2 hours later, he stood at the door of the infirmary and grabbed the doctor. "I feel like I'm seriously injured. Look, it's all swollen. Is there some kind of curse or infection? Also, I can't seem to focus. Did I lose too much origin substance? Look again. Look carefully." In the end, the director of the infirmary couldn't help but roll his eyes. "Mr. Huaishur, you really are very healthy. Please don't waste precious medical resources. But my back hurts like hell. That's because your mattress was too soft. Sorry, the iron crystal bed was all hard mattresses. I'm dizzy. You've lost a lot of blood, but it's not a problem for your hematopoietic function. You'll be fine after eating 2 meals. No, there are 2 blood bags here. Go back and inject them yourself." Wait, my vision suddenly turned black. "Doctor, am I going blind? Because your arm touched the light bulb switch." The director of the infirmary sighed and put down the record in his hand. He asked helplessly, "What do you want to do?" "I want to stay in the hospital." Huaisher opened his eyes wide and said seriously, "You see, every time after a big battle, if I don't stay in the hospital, I always feel like I'm missing something. You can even give me a bed to lie on." The director of the infirmary sighed and began to look around. He wanted to find a rope to hang him here, or himself. Fortunately, before the tragedy happened, a late savior finally appeared. "I heard that Mr. Huaisher has woken up." There was a knock on the door. The purser outside stood in the hallway with his hands behind his back and smiled. "Is it convenient for us to talk, Mr. Huaisher?" Although he didn't satisfy his regret of staying in the hospital, Huaisher thought for a moment and nodded with a sigh. He said to the director of the infirmary, "I'll be back immediately. Let's talk later." "No, no, no, please don't come. Stop wasting medical resources." The medical director's face was so green that it started to turn green. On the deck outside the iron crystal seat, the purser and Huaisher found a secluded place and sat down. "Would you like some tea leaves?" The purser smiled and pointed at the tea stove. "To tell you the truth, I'm a good cook." "Sure." Huaisher nodded indifferently. During the preparation process, the first sentence of the purser made Huaisher heave a sigh of relief. "While you were sleeping, the inspectors from the Astronomy Society came by. The old man said, 'After the investigation, it has been decided that your actions will not be pursued.' Congratulations, Mr. Huaisher. You don't have to attend the hearing and inquiry. However, the other party hopes that you can write a good report later as evidence for the monthly meeting of the Central Command Bureau's countermeasures room." Huaisher was stunned for a long time. He couldn't help but wipe off his cold sweat. This matter was let go so easily. Although the Sunmaker's choice had nothing to do with him, he was directly involved in the whole matter after all. It was equivalent to him releasing a new ruler. A ruler, even the weakest ruler, was enough to pose a major threat to the present realm and set off stormy waves in the abyss. Not to mention, she still had a blood feud. Huaisher was already prepared to be fired or sent to the trench prison to participate in education related to the present realm. He didn't expect it to be over just like that. The inspector was quite easy to talk to. He didn't make things too difficult for the relevant personnel. He was quite easy to talk to, but he seemed to be very curious about you having a child. He even asked about it for a long time. "Are you acquaintances?" the purser asked. Huaisher instinctively felt that something was wrong and looked up in surprise. "What's his name? Where is he from?" "It's said that he's from the Abyss Development Bureau. He was temporarily appointed to lead a team because of his deep work nearby. He didn't tell us his specific name, but I remember that his surname is Wu. Abyss Development Bureau, surnamed Wu, and he wants to persecute me." As he thought about it, Huaisher's vision turned black. His hands trembled. He almost spilled the tea. "Isn't that the fox guy?" If he guessed correctly, the inspector who came and left was really an acquaintance of his. It was the old fox who was accidentally persecuted by his reputation on the night of the witch. But now he had a chance. Back then, he accidentally said something wrong and caused him to be ridiculed for hundreds of years. Now that he had found a chance, wouldn't he make Huaisher suffer double? He had already foreseen the tragic future of his reputation being shattered. His face was pale. He would rather it was someone else who came and took him to participate in the interrogation. At least there wouldn't be any danger to his life. Just a senior sister, who occasionally glanced over with a smile, was enough to make him unable to stand it. If 2 more rounds of gossip were to spread to the present realm, he didn't know what kind of person he would be. Huaisher, the perverted demon, was really enough, but he still had to accept a favor from the fox guy. The birth of a ruler couldn't be ignored by the Central Command Bureau. Although this ruler didn't have much interest in the present realm, The necessary precautions and vigilance should at least be in place. If the Sunmaker were to take control of a force in the abyss and obtain some kind of authority, the level of vigilance would probably have to be adjusted. As the instigator, Huaishur was only given a small punishment. He wrote a report and acted as if nothing had happened. This kind of treatment was already worthy of being called the son of the Central Command Bureau. Even the Grand Master began to suspect that Huaishur was having an affair with some rich old woman in the central countermeasure room. Such a big matter was actually just an internal criticism. He was prepared to use that old bastard Russell as a scapegoat at the critical moment, but in the end, there wasn't even a sound of thunder or rain, and he was dealt with coldly. What exactly happened behind the scenes, and what kind of unspeakable deal Russell had made with the higher-ups of the Astronomical Association, was not within the scope of his consideration. Later, don't harass the infirmary anymore. Your physical examination was done by me and the Grand Master personally, and we guarantee your health. The purser sighed and said, "But in the next month, don't fight with anyone and try not to use the sacred mark. Your tendency to solidify is a little high recently." Huaishur nodded in understanding. This was the after-effect of the eternal frost furnace's internal curse. After all, it was impossible to be completely fine after soaking in the black sea formed by pure despair for so long. If he wasn't a celestial genealogy, had abyss resistance, and the high-grade version of young arbiter of life's sacred mark, he would have solidified long ago. The reason why he was still alive and kicking was all because he had spent enough money before. Even a precious material like the Rotten Dreams remains was used as the foundation of the bone burial sanctuary. Now, as long as Huaishur didn't act recklessly, a mere rootless curse would be digested after some time. In turn, it could strengthen the passive effect of the bone burial sanctuary. Unfortunately, young arbiter of life's destiny had nothing to do with killing. Even if she could obtain a large amount of correction points by participating in the destruction of the eternal frost furnace, it couldn't make the sacred mark grow at all. Only when young arbiter of life reached perfection and used the secret ritual to transform into a great arbiter of life would it come in handy. Therefore, if one were to talk about the biggest gain from this hell expansion, other than the iron ingot that the Sunmaker refined from the Black Sea, there was only his right hand. Soul, hand of imprisonment. He had already reached the perfection stage of level 3 in advance, skipping a long period of grinding and reaching the sky in a single step, completely merging with the sacred mark. On the surface, 1 + 1 was greater than 2, and the two promoted and grew together. But in reality, this symbolized the deep integration of self and miracle, and was also the ultimate goal of the third stage, ether. He directly skipped the first stage and completed the integration of soul and sacred mark before the organs in his body were completely transformed. All that was left was to wait for young arbiter of life's sacred mark to truly merge with his body during the growth process, allowing his body, sacred mark, and soul to completely merge. Then, he could start preparing for the great arbiter of life's transformation. Huaishur could not help but have a headache when he thought about the large wave of money he would need at that time. Other than that, the only flaw was that, due to the Sunmaker's last-minute addition of materials and the deep integration of his soul with the sacred mark, there was a slight abnormality in his body that had not completely transformed into ether. Simply put, Huaishur's right hand, from his elbow to his elbow, was completely metallized. It looked like an expensive artificial arm that had been meticulously carved and decorated, covered with gorgeous patterns, deconstructed and complicated, and full of charm. The touch was still the same, and the weight did not change. It was as if it was born this way, without any disharmony and without any impression of daily life. The grip strength and firmness had increased, but not to an exaggerated extent. Huaishur had tried before. And when the forging furnace was activated, his entire right arm would enter a state of high origin matter, greatly increasing the ability of the Hand of Imprisonment. To a certain extent, it could modify and specialize the weapon he created. Forging LV. 7. The new skills certified by the Book of Destiny were in a separate column apart from alchemy. This was the legacy of the Sunmaker from the Twilight Village. However, the scope of overlap between the two was not small, especially in the field of metals that Huaishir was most proficient in. There were also great creations and achievements in many fields. According to Huaishir's estimation, if he could advance his forging to LV10, his soul ability would undergo a further qualitative change, and he would even be able to upgrade his weapons. It was a pity that the Sunmaker had only left behind a record that could not even be considered a general outline. He could only combine the rest with alchemy and figure it out himself. Naturally, there were a lot of experiments and failures waiting for him. When Huaishir came back to his senses, he suddenly realized that he had opened a new line of money to spend, and it was a bottomless pit that was not inferior to alchemy. Looking at the small amount of balance and savings in his account, he could already imagine how cool they would be when they bid him farewell. For a moment, Huaishir could not help but feel sad, and he found it difficult to breathe. Chapter 602. Although it was difficult to breathe, he still had to breathe, and not long after, Huaishir threw this matter to the back of his mind, like a silly dog hiding its head in the sand to escape from reality. When there were too many lice, one would not worry. When there were too many debts, one would not itch. In his limited life, Huaishir understood a principle. No matter how hard humans tried to save money, when it was time to spend it, they would have to spend it. If you did not spend it, someone else might spend it for you, or you would never have the chance to spend it again. Was it not just money? If it was gone, he could earn it again. Huaishir had gotten used to the sharp pain in his heart. With tears in his eyes, he picked up the teacup and drank it in one gulp. Then he was stunned. "How do you feel?" The purser came up and looked at him expectantly. "I used a new formula this time. The effect should be good, right?" "This feeling, it's so good." Huaishir lowered his head in disbelief and looked at the teacup in his hand. He could still smell the wonderful tea fragrance lingering around his mouth, and the tea in his stomach seemed to rise, bringing about a continuous, wonderful reaction. He could not help but exhale, sweeping away the frustration in his chest and calming his body and mind. His restless heart quickly calmed down, and he felt a sense of peace. "How did you cook it?" He carefully sipped the tea in the cup. "I'll go back and prepare some." The chief steward laughed and looked relieved. As expected, Mr. Huaishir knows how to appreciate art the best. "How about this? I'll write down the method later. Although a lot of it depends on experience, you'll be able to reach my level of excellence if you keep trying. Tell me more." Huaishir's eyes lit up and asked. Just as the two of them were talking about tea-making techniques and cooking, a faint roar came from above. At this moment, the iron crystal was suspended in the sky, but a dark shadow appeared on the deck of the iron crystal, gradually extending forward. The illusory light source of the dome giant, after its death, was covered. A fleet of airships that blotted out the sky rumbled as they flew past at an even higher altitude. The purser paused for a moment, looked up, and stared at the airships roaring away. He could not help but squint his eyes. "I have to say, this flustered and exasperated retreat is really pleasing to the eye." As he spoke, he raised his teacup and bid farewell to the Ivy League emblem on the airship's flagship. He watched as the losers left. Huaishir struggled to raise his head and look up. They could vaguely see two figures overlooking them from the top of the flagship, but they couldn't see them clearly. However, one of the silhouettes was extremely familiar. "Have a safe journey." He raised his hand and waved it forcefully. The other party also raised his hand. The shadow of a middle finger was cast on the deck of the iron crystal seat. Finally, a neck was drawn. "Scum, I'll kill you in 3 days. I'll skin you alive." That was probably what it meant. Huaisha raised his eyebrows and shrugged. He watched as the airship's shadow gradually disappeared into the distance before withdrawing his gaze. He continued to drink tea. Once again, he began to enjoy his life as a salted fish. Speaking of which, there's still a piece of good news that I haven't had the time to tell you. The purser suddenly said, but after thinking about it, it's better to let the person involved come and thank him personally. The person involved? Huaisha raised his head in puzzlement when he saw the man who had been waiting for a long time not far away. His eyes widened and he froze on the spot. "See, Huaisha, it's not like you didn't do anything." The purser raised his eyebrows happily. "In this hell, at least one person was saved because of you. Chandra." Huaisha was in disbelief. You're alive?" "Although I don't know why I was chosen by the record of the kingdom of heaven, I guess I'm alive now." The purser's soul, who was once named Chandra, lowered his head and thanked him with a hand on his chest. "Thank you for everything you've done, Mr. Huaisha." In his hand, a thick book appeared. Les Miserables. "Is that so?" In the sudden surprise, Huaisha laughed. "It seems that there are good things in hell occasionally." "Did you make a friend, Liz?" Higher in the sky, on the outer deck of the airship, an old man in a wheelchair turned around and looked at the angry girl beside him. Liz turned back with a serious expression. "Is there anyone in the world who would call this a friend, teacher?" Michelle laughed. "I think it's good for you to make more friends. If you always act like a high priest, you'll feel lonely sometimes, right? After I peel his skin and offer it to the skinner, offer his organs to Kukulkan, and offer his heart and head to the first son, I'll consider being friends with the rest of him." Liz replied seriously. "Other than that, I don't think there's any possibility of getting along with that guy. Please rest well and don't think too much, okay? It's cold outside. You should go back. It's just a breeze. What's the big deal?" Michel shook his head indifferently. He lowered his head and looked at the steel bracelet on his wrist that looked like a shackle. On the small screen of the bracelet, there was still a faint orange glow. It had gradually faded from the red area, but it did not return to the safe green area. This was the proof of soul contamination, a sign of solidification. He was very clear about his own situation. It was just like how miracles and disasters were two sides of the same coin. As an alchemist, it was impossible for Michel not to know what he was doing, surpassing his own limits, recklessly activating the divine mark and operating it in hell for such a long time. Before this, he was already well aware of the possible consequences. The so-called sublimation and solidification were concepts relative to the Silver Sea. They were terms used to describe and define the state of a soul. They corresponded to the classification of matter in physics, liquid, gas, and solid. If the Silver Sea, which was formed from the souls of all humans and supported the 3 great seals, was liquid, then a sublimator who left the Silver Sea and acted alone would be in a gas state. No matter how large it was as small as a wisp of mist compared to the Silver Sea. On the other hand, if it was pulled down by the gravity of the abyss and sank into hell, it would become solid. It was like a status bar with 3 different areas. Unfortunately, there was no way to reverse it. The changes were usually one way. Once a sublimator left the Silver Sea, the source substance would not be able to return to the Silver Sea after death. Once it chose the abyss and solidified, it would not be able to return to its original light, gaseous state. The existence of a sublimator was like a barrier between the solid state represented by hell and the liquid state represented by the present realm. Once it was unable to resist the corrosion of hell, the soul would be assimilated by hell in the melting of the sacred mark and finally solidify again. It was like smashing something and putting it back together again. It would no longer be the same as before. The price of sublimation was to face hell directly. The side effect of embracing miracles was that disasters would follow like a shadow. The sacred mark that represented miracles and the disaster that represented abyss came from the same source, but the way they were manifested was completely different. The sublimator was given a miracle, while the solidification was the disaster itself. Even if they only appeared in the present realm, it would increase the distortion of the entire realm. Even if they did nothing, they would accelerate the decline of the realm. Needless to say, in order to pursue the distortion, they would do many crazy things. This was no longer within the realm of subjective will. Just like how the sacred mark would instinctively pursue miracles and realize its own destiny, the solidified disaster would also thirst for growth. One was the expansion of growth, while the other was the devouring of death. This was the difference in nature. Any solidified person would be seen as a cancer cell in the present realm and would be treated as an enemy by the Silver Sea. Needless to say, the Astronomical Society would hunt them down and eradicate them, and the suppression of the 3 Great Seals. And now, even Michel himself felt that it was inconceivable. He was still alive, but there were only some signs of solidification, and he had not completely fallen into the abyss. Other than the fact that the Ivy League's medical skills were frightening, it could only be said that they were unbelievably lucky. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief and thanked the gods for their blessings. But only Michel felt that perhaps there was still a possibility of humiliation. That bastard Mikhail had deliberately held back and even indirectly interfered with the degree of corrosion. He had deliberately chosen to passively defend and did not give him a chance to cross that fatal boundary. He would not allow him to degenerate into that ugly state. Just thinking of this possibility, Michel could not help but feel so humiliated that he wanted to commit suicide. Mikhail had long known that even if he was alive, he would not have any gratitude towards him, but he still made a choice. Michel really didn't know which one was more painful for her when she compared the high and mighty mercy and the feeling of being frozen and dying. In the cold wind high up in the sky, the old man in the wheelchair let out a long sigh and sighed softly, "Autism and egomania. Which one is more annoying, Liz?" Liz thought for a moment and shook her head. "I don't know. Both feel very troublesome." "Yes, both are very troublesome. I should not have gotten involved with such a person in the first place. It's best to let him go far away and never appear in front of me again." As Michel spoke, he looked at the disappearing silhouette of the iron crystal in the distance and could not help but laugh at himself. He suddenly recalled something that happened a few decades ago. It was a memory that was still so vivid. Under the dim afternoon sun, he saw the silent youth beside his teacher for the first time. The youth lowered his head, his lips slightly pursed, and did not dare to raise his head to look into other people's eyes. His black hair shone with golden light under the setting sun. His teacher said, "His name is Mikhail, just like yours." At that time, when he smiled and reached out his hand to express his goodwill to the youth, did he expect this to happen? Compared to having a happy and harmonious memory, and then becoming enemies in the end, it would be better if both sides did not see eye to eye and did not interact much, right? He sighed and closed his eyes in melancholy. The overconfident final counterattack came to an end. In the end, it still failed. "I'm sorry, teacher." Liz lowered her head and did not know how to face him. "If at that time What does this have to do with you, Liz?" Michel raised his head and looked at her guilty expression. "Does the student have to bear the responsibility for the teacher's failure? That's too much. Moreover, Facing such an enemy, such a dazzling hero, who dares to say that they will definitely win? Liz did not speak. Lift up your head, Liz. Michel stretched out his hand and patted her shoulder. It's just a loss, don't take it to heart. Why is the student so dejected when the teacher lost a match? He said, let's go back. The wind is too strong outside. Liz nodded, pushed the wheelchair, and walked towards the open door. In his sleepiness, Michel heard the girl's words behind him. Please leave the unfinished work to me, teacher. In the silence, Liz promised softly, I will win, and I will keep winning until everyone knows that Michel is Liz Hetmock's teacher. Michel was stunned. After a long time, okay, he smiled and nodded seriously. I'll leave it to you to do what I can't do. This was the promise between the teacher and the student. Don't disturb them. We'll take care of the rest. Inside the cabin, Pan DeLong watched the scene on the monitor. After a long time, he retracted his gaze and looked in front of him. Behind the layers of transparent walls, in front of the scholars and alchemists who came and went, was a wreckage suspended by countless pieces of equipment. It looked like a large hibernation chamber. This was the Ivy League's only spoil of war, the remains of the Eternal Frost Furnace. It was one of the disasters left behind by the forgers. The immortal machine. Second prize. The old man sighed softly. Even though we didn't get the Eternal Frost Furnace, with this thing, the construction of the solar ephemeris can be shortened by at least a bit. As the final seal was inserted, a torrent of liquid origin substance poured into the isolation chamber, rapidly freezing it and sealing away this precious sample of disaster origin substance. The immortal machine's preservation was complete. Let's go. Pan DeLong retracted his gaze and turned to walk towards the bridge. Not long after, a large wind tunnel opened at the end of the infernal realm. The vast fleet of airships left without any hesitation. Are they leaving? On the bridge of the Iron Crystal Constellation, the Grand Master waved his hand indifferently and changed the projection on the large screen. A large blueprint appeared from the transmission, almost taking up the entire bridge. But even at such a large scale, it was still impossible to clearly show the details. It could only barely show some of the outlines. The scale of the project is much larger than expected. The Grand Master frowned. I'm afraid the Iron Crystal Constellation alone won't be able to complete it smoothly. Of course, it's not just you. I've already used the dragon's summoning flute to send a signal. In about half a month, the Crimson Deer and Gray Stork will report in. Russell said, apart from White Dove's other mission, the 4 campuses in the Abyss will all listen to your command. All of the Ivory Tower's power in the Infernal Realm is in your hands, Mikhail. It's still not enough. The Grand Master shook his head. After all, it's no longer the time when the Utopia was still around. We have to learn to be thrifty. Russell sighed. Our conditions are limited. You have to be thrifty. Besides, the entire mechanized infernal realm is ready-made. It's right in front of you. Hasn't this already solved the most heavy work? Do you think alchemy is like building a house? Mikhail glared at him. Even if the infernal realm has been mechanized, it's not something that can be used casually. It's not that easy to reforge the giant of the underworld. Do you expect me to make a flaw? What if we take a step back? Russell suddenly asked, what if we don't rebuild Osiris? The Grand Master frowned. You're playing the game of changing needs with me? Do you want me to redesign a few versions for you? No, what I mean is, aren't there 2 Tier 5 of the Eternal Road? Russell said, Osiris is no longer suitable for the current era. Mikhail, what celestial genealogy needs now is not a weapon of war that can destroy everything, but a camp that can recuperate, a temporary home, a retreat, and an existence that can replace the land of dreams. Following Russell's words, the design blueprint floating in the bridge suddenly changed. The giant that originally supported the heavens and created hell had disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by a majestic and divine gigantic silhouette. It was also the fifth stage of the eternal road in the Kingdom of Heaven system. It was also a gigantic miracle that was akin to a man-made god. In the silence, the Grandmaster's eyes gradually lit up. Horus of the Heavenly Fortress. Chapter 603. Name: Holy. Age: Holy. Race: Holy. On the table in the laboratory, the steel crow spread its wings and jumped excitedly. It responded to all of Huaishur's questions like a repeater, until Huaishur looked at the standard border mutant IQ test questionnaire with 7 or 8 pages left. He finally wisely chose to give up. Okay, I'll skip the intelligence test, he sighed, threw the test questionnaire to the corner, and rubbed his head. It couldn't be helped. After the crows had evolved to V2, 0, the situation had become strange after a major update. It was difficult to use common sense to predict the situation. Even Huaishur himself didn't know what code he wrote. If he wanted to figure out what it was, he had to check it from the beginning. Although the questionnaire was useless, according to Huaishur's experience, its intelligence had grown to the level of 7 or 8 years old. It was obvious that it had grown a lot from its previous stuttering to its current fluency. It was a mature repeater. It felt like a trip to hell was like a trip to the wholesale market. He didn't bring anything, but he bought more than 1,000 repeaters. What a loss! While his heart was filled with mixed feelings, his fingers tapped the pen. Finally, the environment in the laboratory was changed. A giant wind tunnel equipment was temporarily deployed from the underground and rose in the laboratory. Okay, let's fly. He reached out and lifted the mechanical crow in his hand. It felt heavy, about 40 to 50 kilograms. He almost couldn't carry it. If it piled on his body like before, Huaishur felt that his bones would be fractured. Parents who found that their children were too big to carry were probably as sad as Huaishur was at this moment. The door of the wind tunnel opened. Huaishur reached out and threw the crow in his hand into the cabin. With the operation of the equipment, a hurricane roared out, forming a constant airflow. In the hurricane, the crow skillfully spread its wings and flew up and down. There were even several spouts on its iron wings, which could be used for continuous micromanipulation, allowing it to make all kinds of fancy movements in the wind tunnel. Flying was its old profession. It seemed that there was no problem. Then, the maximum speed. Huaishur began to adjust the wind level. It didn't take long for the parameters on the display to get an effective result. After long-distance acceleration, the maximum speed was 240 meters per second, but there was no way to maintain it for long. The normal speed was about 90 meters per second, but the individual qualities of the crow were different. Some were faster, some were fatter, and some were slower. Taking the average was enough. As for strength, Huaishur began to scratch his head. How to measure the crow's strength? In any case, Huaishur's scalp tingled at the sight of those alloy claws. Ordinary steel plates could be torn apart with just 2 claws. Crows now weighed about 30 kilograms and had a wingspan of 2 meters. They could be monsters in low-budget horror movies. Based on the calculation of their weight and speed, the force of their dive was enough to tear through ordinary protective shields, like paper. They could even cause effective damage to reinforced concrete structures. The destructive power was not small at all. But the problem was the effective force was mutual. The body of steel was not like this. If it destroyed the opposite side, it could also be destroyed, even if the machine had a certain degree of self-recovery. Beyond this degree, there was no way to self-repair. Maintenance was Huaishur's job. After studying for a night, Huaisher still didn't find anything new. When the sky outside brightened, he put down the records in his hand and went home for breakfast. In the damp and cold morning air, the ivory tower had begun to show signs of activity. In fact, this place was quite active 24 hours a day. After all, they were all sublimators. All of them were immortal cultivators. Staying up for 48 hours was like playing. When it came to the graduation project, there were also fierce people who took drugs and didn't sleep for a month. Because of this, there were quite a number of people who got insomnia and went to recuperate along the way. When the students who woke up early or went to bed late saw Huaisher, they stood by the side very politely and nodded to greet him. Some of the bolder ones even wanted to come up and take photos, but they were all rejected by Huaisher. Definitely next time. Definitely next time. After skillfully rejecting the requests of the female students to take photos with him, Huaisher sped up and ran home. He had suffered enough from the recent hustle and bustle of gossip. He didn't dare to fool around with the female benefactors outside. Since returning to the ivory tower, he had been in the classroom and at home every day. Other than that, he didn't go out of the door like a lady from a wealthy family. He didn't dare to go out blindly. "Young master, welcome back." Fang Shu popped his head out of the kitchen. "Miss Yuan and Mr. Lin will be here soon. You can start after breakfast." "Okay." Huaisher yawned and collapsed on the sofa. He looked around and felt that something was missing. "Wait, where's Tongi?" "Miss Tongi just went out. Seems like she's busy with something, but she made a reservation for tonight's dinner." Huaisher scratched his head and froze for a long time. Suddenly, his eyes widened in anger. Where did that wild woman go again? Huaisher scolded angrily. "If she doesn't follow the curfew next time, I'll break her legs." His scolding made him feel satisfied as a master. At this time, Fang Shu could only hold back his laughter in the kitchen and pretend that he didn't hear anything. Unfortunately, even the omnipotent Beelzebub didn't dare to pop his head out and say, "Master, Tongi has been locked up in the basement by you for 3 years," so that Huaisher could ask if she regretted it. Moreover, he felt that the black-hearted woman could still steal his money even if she was locked up in the basement. This world was too dangerous. After hurriedly eating breakfast, Huaisher finally woke up a little. After the 2 students came to his door, he began to check on their progress in the past 2 days. Yuan's improvement was very gratifying. Her violin skills were improving very quickly. In just a few days, she had improved a lot. Lin Shurjio's results were lagging behind. He wasn't good at beheading and hadn't learned Huaisher's fancy decapitation yet. However, Huaisher didn't have high expectations for him. If he wasn't good at fighting, it was fine as long as he didn't let others fight him. Even if he couldn't win, he had to be able to run away. At most, he would hold a concert in a few days and give little 19 some special lessons to train his survival skills. However, when it was time to hand in the homework, Lin 19 winked and secretly handed over a notebook, indicating that he had learned everything written by the teacher. There were a few techniques that inspired him, and he wanted to see if there were any new ones for him. It was as if the teacher and disciple were exchanging some esoteric books. That was the draft version of Beginner's Guide to Hell's Cooking Demon that Huaisher had taken some time to write. He finally started to teach according to the students' aptitude. For the Lin family, they were born very sensitive to all kinds of negative auras and auras of disasters. They were suitable for alchemy, curses, and poisons. Wasn't Lin Shurjio's cousin, Lin Yu, also an outstanding talent? In any case, Huaisher had seen clearly that the Abyss Cooking Demon was just a box that could fit any random thing inside. He might as well teach him the beginning and let him figure it out himself. Instead of learning the good, little 19 learned the bad things at a rapid pace. If he couldn't destroy the enemy's heart, he would destroy the enemy's stomach. He liked this method too much. Actually, he didn't need to be so sneaky, but there was no other way. Feng Shu wouldn't let him. To the old man, Huai Shi was good at everything, but he really didn't like the things that Huai Shi was fiddling with at home. Every time he saw them, he would blow his beard and glare. Huai Shi could only sneakily take little 19 to class outside with Lin Shizhou. The results weren't bad. After a short period of research and practice, Lin Shizhou could already innovate and cook multicolored black porridge and multicolored white rice. Moreover, it seemed like he could adapt to his family's curses and innovate, presumably. In the next elimination round in a few years, it wouldn't be a problem to get a certificate from the Abyss Cooking Demon. This also made Huai Shi relieved. After all, being a chef was the most stable job. With this skill, no matter how bad things were in the future, at least he wouldn't starve to death. Yuan went to be a disaster musician, you went to be the Abyss Cooking Demon, and I went to be the Paradise Prince. We all have a bright future. How good it sounded. Check the progress, give guidance, and then assign homework. After he was done, it was almost noon. Stay for lunch later. Huai Shi said, I'm going to do a casting. Do you want to come over and take a look? Lin Shizhou nodded happily. After Yuan thought about it, she didn't say anything. Looking at her vaguely dazed look, Huai Shi couldn't help but shake his head and rub her hair. It's useful to practice more, but at least you need to take a breather occasionally, right? In the afternoon, you can come and help me. Just treat it as voluntary labor. It seemed that the last time she was captured by the Ivy League was her fault for being too weak. Recently, she had been very focused on practicing the piano. According to her aunt last time, she hadn't been out for a long time, which was a little worrying. Huai Shi didn't quite understand. Wasn't it just being captured? Teacher was very happy to stay in the Ivy League's prison. Are you still worried about disgracing the school? Besides, didn't he take care of you with good food and drinks? Why was it like a semester of class, and then finding out that you didn't pass the exam? It was easy to get into trouble if you worked too hard. For a Buddhist salted fish like Huai Shi, the most important thing in life was to strike a balance between work and rest. If you can't even fish, what's the point of living? He pinched his chin and began to think. Should I go back and buy a few movie tickets and find an excuse to take Yuan out for a breather? It's not good to be bored at home. But what was puzzling was that every time he thought about it, he always felt a faint premonition of death. Life was really too difficult to understand. In the afternoon, Huai Shi took the students to the Alchemy Equipment Management Center, Tai Academy, on time. The name was Tai Academy, but in fact, it had nothing to do with the Tai in celestial genealogy, nor was it the Tai in the cartoon. It was a term in alchemy, rising from hell, descending from heaven, in order to achieve the miracle of Tai. The Tai here referred to the common origin of all things, and everything flowed from the supreme source. If one had to say something, there wasn't much creativity. For example, it was like the Yujian restaurant and the Dragon Gate Inn. At first glance, it was obvious that this name was casually given by Russell, and he didn't care at all. In the final analysis, it was because his level was not good enough. Huai Shi secretly criticized. Chapter 604. For some reason, Huai Shi always had 100,000 complaints about that old bastard Russell. He really wanted to find an opportunity to stab him in the back a few times to avenge his persecution, but he couldn't beat him. Instead, he had to be ordered around by him every day, dedicating his youth to the ivory tower. 2 days ago, when he was filming the promotional video, he was dragged over to be a tool for a long time, and he didn't get a single cent. It was as if the park's copyright was nothing. It was simply lawless. If it weren't for the fact that Kitten wouldn't pick up his call, Huaishur would have directly called the legal department to come and ask for money. Tai Yi Courtyard occupied a large area, but there weren't many buildings on the surface. Most of them were underground, in the strange atmosphere left behind by countless alchemy experiments. There were only a few lonely small buildings. There wasn't even a blade of grass growing around them, and from time to time, black smoke would come out of the cracks in the ground. It was impossible to imagine what this group of people was doing here. Before they reached the door, a person with a cane came up to greet them warmly. The white-haired, old man looked a little stooped, wearing a loose Ingzhou uniform, and had been waiting for a long time. "Sorry to keep you waiting, Mr. Ping." Huaishur hurriedly apologized. "I'm sorry. We should have come earlier." "It's nothing. It's just that this old man couldn't wait any longer. Thank you for allowing me to watch." The old man grinned, his wrinkled face smiling like an old chrysanthemum. "I've already heard about the craftsman's skills from Mr. Simon. I'm really curious. As he spoke, he began to laugh strangely, sending chills down their spines. Come, Mr. Huaishur, your laboratory and secret instruments are all ready." The old man walked in front with his walking stick. He led them through a series of twists and turns in the building, walking deeper and deeper into the darkness. There was definitely something wrong with this building. Behind Huaishur, Lin Shizhou's face was pale. The space and direction inside were completely illogical, and there were also problems with the structure and layout, making people unable to figure out their own position and direction. It was unbelievably large. More importantly, the dense negative origin substances and the aura of disaster inside. It was like walking into some kind of hell. There was a chill that made people shiver uncontrollably. The little hut in the forest saw its shadow leave its body and wriggle on the wall. When it sensed his gaze, its head twisted into an unbelievable angle. She turned back and smiled at him. His expression twitched as he hurriedly followed behind Huaishur, not leaving her by a single step. He was just short of pretending to be young and holding her hand. Huaishur heaved a long sigh of relief. He turned around and asked, "You turned on the air conditioner so early?" Yes, that's right." The manager of the workshop nodded in agreement and patted his back. "Aya, I'm old, and I'm afraid of the heat. I hope Mr. Huai doesn't mind." It's fine. I'm pretty cool, too." Huaishur nodded in agreement and walked into the flashing elevator. Just as everyone went up, the lights above their heads suddenly dimmed and went out completely. In the brief darkness, Lin Shizhou felt something brush past his face. It was so cold and so soft. He froze on the spot. Then she heard a hoarse cough. It was low and sharp, tearing through the darkness and bringing light back. "Sorry, the voice-controlled lights installed a few years ago are broken again." The old man squinted his eyes and waved his hand awkwardly. After pressing the elevator's meter twice, the elevator slowly closed and finally began to descend. Lin Shizhou subconsciously moved closer to Huaishur again, almost hugging his legs. On the inner wall of the elevator next to him, the mold-like stains and spots began to wriggle faintly and slowly spread, forming a rapidly protruding face. Then a hand came over with a detergent and sprayed it twice. It disappeared. "Sorry, it seems that the cleaners didn't clean up today. It's rare to have visitors here, so everyone is a little casual. I didn't expect them to slack off to this extent. I'll take good care of it later. It's really outrageous." As he spoke, Ping Du stuffed the spray bottle filled with highly concentrated holy water back into his sleeve and grinned at the guests. "Everyone, please bear with us. After all, this is the only century-old building on campus." Kiki, it's been in disrepair for a long time. In disrepair, Lin Shurjo wisely kept quiet. He was afraid that he would be eaten by this old ghost. Who knew what this old ghost was doing on a daily basis? He was surrounded by all kinds of curses and disasters. Even a single age spot on his face could poison an entire school to death. Moreover, in this damned place like the Ivory Tower, even if a school building was not renovated for 2 years, there would be 18 ghost stories. To be able to treat this building as a century-old building, it was probably a collection of ghost kings. As a normal person, he really couldn't compare to his teacher's level of thick nerves. Moreover, he was scared to death of ghosts. At this moment, he simply wanted to cry but had no tears. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have come. Fortunately, the laboratory was still clean and tidy, maintaining an absolutely stable environment required by the alchemy artifact. Even the depth of the interior could be adjusted. Using the latest technology, it can support up to level 17 artificial depth. There's no need to worry about the harsh environment required by some artifacts. Inside the huge laboratory, Pingdu raised his hand and caused the floor to slowly unfold, revealing the huge platform hidden below. After the preparation work was done, he stood to the side with a smile, as if he was invisible. He didn't rush Huaishur, but just stared with anticipation at the way he set up the artifact, clicking his tongue in wonder. The setting up of the artifact was quite complicated. After all, the skills of the forgers were different from alchemy. It was very troublesome to combine them together without any deviation. Huaishur took the blueprint that he got from the great grandmaster for free and operated step by step. There were even several mistakes in the process. If it wasn't for Pingdu's reminder, he wouldn't have noticed. In the middle, he also received an email from the old professor of the Russian Federation, Anton, the Ivory Tower's research on the mechanical crow. To simply refine the core idea, it was 4 words: can't help. This was really not within the scope of Anton's field of expertise, even if it was in the field of machinery and transmission. Professor Anton was even able to perfectly restore their structure without dismantling them, but it was useless. Just like a life form that evolved purely from machinery, all the operations in these crows' body were purely maintained by their own source substance and the miracle left behind by the forgers. It was very easy to strengthen them. A lot of external equipment could be stuffed in at any time, but the problem was that this didn't help them at all. It didn't make sense that by changing the graphics card and CPU, your XP system would become XP10, although the forger's inheritance was the same as alchemy in terms of performance and effect. It was fundamentally 2 different ideas. No one knew what the consequences of random experimentation would be. Alchemists had a lot of bold ideas, but Huaishur didn't dare to try any of them. These were all his treasures. Occasionally, 2 or 3 of them would disappear because they couldn't be seen, and Huaishur's heart would ache to death. But despite his heartache, Huaishur still firmly prohibited the spread of the small books. Otherwise, what would happen if word got out? It would ruin his image. In short, according to the results of the Ivory Tower's research, the crows were healthy. They didn't suffer from heat stroke, nor did they break their legs or other accidents. The results of this upgrade were very good. With the help of the Sunmaker, they were uniformly given a perfect foundation template. It was like completing a profession change after leaving the novice village. They could freely change between source substance and mechanization. They obtained a high affinity for metal, which made it easier for Huaishur's confining hand to operate further. At the same time, they were also given a terrifying resistance to hell. They could move as usual even in an abnormal area 19 meters deep. Other than that, there was nothing else. This was just a foundation. Huaishur had to deal with the rest by himself. Therefore, after some research, The big bosses came to the conclusion that it wasn't difficult, but it wasn't easy either. Not difficult meant that it wasn't difficult at all for the big bosses. But for Huaisher, sorry, this operation is too smooth. I'm afraid you won't be able to learn it. Therefore, in the end, there were only two possible ways to implement it. One was to leave it to the heavens to see if the crows could rely on their own efforts to make Huaisher's destiny grow by repeating the Holy Scriptures every day, which in turn would help them improve. Perhaps they would even be able to give him a birthday celebration. The other was for Huaisher to work hard and research the techniques left behind by the Sunmaker to see if he could create a miracle. This could be considered a test left behind by the Sunmaker. The principle of 1 + 1 is equal to 2 had already been taught to him. How to prove that 1 + 1 is equal to 2 was up to him. He even considerately left behind some materials and tools for Huaisher. With a clang, the entire workshop was enveloped in a gloomy fog. The crows worked together to pull out the iron ingot that had been stuffed into the cage of dreams. For origin substance life forms like them, the despair contained within was too heavy. It took a few hundred crows a long time to pull it out. If they had been a few days later, this thing would have taken root inside. There was nothing they could do. If they hadn't done this, they wouldn't have been able to pass through the border customs. This thing looked like an iron ingot, but it was actually an amalgamation of negative origin substances. It was too pure and dense of despair. A curse born from despair and condensed from this curse was something that had undergone at least 3 transformations of origin substances. Once it was released, it was enough to cause an entire border to sink by a whole level. Even if it was an origin substance, it wasn't something that Huaisher's soul could absorb. It needed to be further refined. Huaisher was very excited to see what kind of weapon such a rich supply of negative origin substance and pure despair could create. When Huaisher raised his right hand, his steel-like limbs began to slowly unfurl. The furnace slumbering within began to light up. It was time to forge. Chapter 605. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't nervous about using the forger's technology for the first time. Fortunately, he had simulated it many times before and was confident in his confinement hand, so he didn't panic and wasn't afraid of losing control. After Huaisher returned to the present realm, the first thing he did was contact the Continuation Institute and upload all the technology left behind by the forgers. He didn't treat it as a great fortune or property, whether it was as a member of the Astronomical Society or as a member of the present realm. While enjoying so many conveniences, he still had to bear some obligations. The biggest reason for doing this was, of course, to entrust this technology that was too profound and obscure for Huaisher to someone trustworthy for identification. After all, it was a disaster technology that had once created the eternal frost furnace and the machine of immortality, so there might be a risk of solidification. Otherwise, if something went wrong, it wouldn't be a big deal if she died. Huaisher estimated that if the negative origin substances in her body were to erupt, it was very likely that even the ivory tower would be contaminated and innocent students would be implicated as well. Unexpected disasters had to be avoided as much as possible. Necessary caution was necessary. Although the same thing could be done by troubling Tanguy or the Grandmaster, this job was really a big project. Who knew how long it would take just to verify all the possibilities of the forger furnace? It was too troublesome, so Huaisher didn't want to ask at all. In contrast, the Continuation Institute had so much manpower and material resources, and they didn't need money. Wasn't it easier than troubling their own people? According to the technology submitted by Huaisher, the Continuation Institute sent a commissioner to collect information, and the examination room also specially organized teams and groups. After a week of research, deduction, and observation, they finally gave Huaishur a guarantee. Don't worry, there won't be any problems. They even wrote a thick beginner's handbook for Huaishur, explaining all the key points that newbies should pay attention to and the phenomena that they should be vigilant of, all the way from kindergarten to the end of compulsory education. In short, this thing was good stuff. You can keep it for yourself. You don't have to cooperate with us to submit it or restore it. If there was a problem, there was only one. It couldn't be replicated. All the forger's skills relied on the forger furnace as a foundation, just like all ascendants had to have a soul. But now, after searching the entire realm several times, there were only 2 forgers left. One was the Sunmaker, and the other was Huaishur, the Sunmaker's forger, which couldn't be caught, and Huaishur's forger furnace couldn't be dismantled. It was very difficult. Moreover, there was no need to replicate it. With the Survival Academy's technology, it was just a knockoff. Not to mention this thing, they could even create an eternal frost furnace. But what's the use? Purely in terms of cost-effectiveness and the difficulty of promotion of forger's est, SSSTs AST ascendances, ascendant time teat, SSSTs AST alchemies, TEST as ASSs therefore. Apart from being an important technical record and a reference in some fields, there was no point in promoting or replicating it. The Stone Cauldron Society, on the other hand, was very interested. They bought 2 copies to study and finally got Huaishur to open one. All the precious materials needed for the forger furnace were bought with the Stone Cauldron Society's money. The rest went to a place where Huaishur could never find them again. He didn't expect that black-hearted woman to be so fast. Huaishur's heart ached when he thought about it. The priest is a foot high. The crow is 10 feet high. In short, just like that, Sui Xiong freeloaded a horse from the east, a saddle from the west, a horsetail from the south, and a whip from the north. Sui Xiong freeloaded a beginner's manual from the Continuation Institute, materials and forger furnace from the Stone Cauldron Society, and even designs from the Grandmaster. After all that, he finally got a set of things. He began the forger furnace. The furnace's flames ignited from the gap in his right arm. They spread and spread, followed by surging darkness that enveloped everything. For this kind of material formed from pure negative origin substances, the most suitable auxiliary tool was the miracle that had merged with Huaishur's soul, the bone burial sanctuary. He activated the furnace. The origin substance was poured in, and then the alchemy fire was ignited. And then the disintegration began. Huaishur's fingers contracted slightly, and he removed the shackles that the Sunmaker had sealed on it. In that instant, the violent despair began to collapse from its physical form. It cracked inch by inch and rapidly expanded, forming an explosive tide that swallowed everything. The seal wailed. Even the artificial depth couldn't make this enormous despair return to its original form. On the contrary, the pale flames from the kingdom of heaven increased the despair's ferocious might, causing the silent darkness to begin to boil. The moment the chain reaction was triggered, this uncontrollable power began to follow a set track like a roller coaster, wildly transforming towards the end. What Huaishur needed to do was guide this despair to complete the final qualitative change. It wouldn't destroy everything in front of him when it derailed. There's still one last step. At this moment, in the secret ritual, the burning flag in Huaishur's left hand appeared again and stabbed down. It completely swallowed all this despair into eternal darkness. The moment of rebirth had arrived. The cold light illuminated the color of steel. In the huge sealed underground facility, there were only layers of heavy defenses and various seals from the relics of the border, as well as the 24-hour surveillance and observation of the sublimators. Under the cover of countless arrays, there was only a huge crack in the center of the hall. It was a well. A giant deep well that was as large as a lake. Looking down from the observatory in the sky, one could see the unreasonable and terrifying size of the deep well as everything sleeping in the well water. In the quiet well water, the outline and reflection of the incomplete city appeared. It was as if everything was submerged in the water, frozen in this sinking, and welcomed a peaceful sleep together with the terrifying things inside. Until the day of awakening arrived. The well water evaporated, and the sins and deaths of the past rose from the darkness, enveloping everything in destruction. The old campus. Russell sighed softly. No matter how many times I see it, I feel sad. The cradle that we were once proud of, the cornerstone laid by the idealists, has now fallen to such a state. After the fall of the kingdom of heaven, it's already not easy for the ivory tower, which is the foundation, to barely survive. Don't say anything about being greedy. Beside him, a slender and blurry silhouette appeared. Her voice was soft. You're not regretting anything. You just want to go back to the past. People are like this when they're old. Russell scratched his head. I miss everything when I was young. I miss myself back then. Don't you think so? What answered him was a meaningful look in her eyes. Don't ask questions about a lady's age. That's outrageous. Russell, don't you think so? I'm just curious. Ignoring the terrifying experience of having just brushed shoulders with death, Russell laughed. Sorry, it's become a habit to take advantage of my seniority. I always forget about my partner. With your condition, you can at least live for another 300 years, Russell. For a stage 5, you're still in the prime of your life. But for ordinary people, it's already the age of retirement. Russell supported himself with his cane and couldn't help but sigh. Recently, I've been having a dream. In the dream, after getting rid of all the burdens, I ran on the beach with young girls playing with each other with water guns. How happy it was. After waking up, once I think about it, I can't help but cry. I feel that my years have been wasted. Are you married? Russell didn't expect this question. After being stunned for a long time, he shook his head. No, I can't find a suitable one. Do you have an illegitimate child? I don't think so. Do you have someone you love? Maybe you used to have one. Russell thought for a while, took off his hat, and scratched his long white hair. He couldn't help but sigh. But they're all dead. Whether it's the one I love or the one who loves me, they've all become the past. Otherwise, they've sunk into hell. Then the soft voice became sympathetic. That's why there's hatred, Russell, she said, towards the kingdom of heaven and towards yourself. Russell didn't say anything. What you love isn't youth. What you want isn't to run on the beach with girls without any worries. What you want isn't a successor to carry the burden for you. That pair of cold eyes scrutinized the man and told him the answer. You just want to take everything back. Russell looked back at the pair of eyes. After a long time, he laughed softly. He didn't say anything else. There was only the sound of the deep well under his feet gradually spreading. The well water was boiling, and something was rising quickly. Under the water, the silent city was shaking, and a roar burst out from the nightmare. Pairs of eyes opened, and then slowly closed. In the end, a figure in a sorry state crawled out with difficulty. He pulled the life support chain that had long been broken and walked forward step by step. In his bosom, a copper bottle depicting the totems of various demon gods was vibrating violently. The thing sealed in it was struggling violently. Through the seal of the relic, the thing bound in it was violently struggling, trying to break through the shackles, but it was powerless. This was a cage that was carefully prepared for it. In the deep well, the boiling well water gradually calmed down, and everything returned to silence. It was only at that moment that everyone present finally heaved a sigh of relief. They rushed forward and began the emergency rescue. On the platform, Russell retracted his gaze. "It's all thanks to the help you provided, madam." The old man looked at the phantom beside him. "The Supreme Terminal has been recovered. With the axis of the former Utopia, the final problem of the Sky Prison Fortress has finally been solved. It's just a map and a few keys. Don't mention it." The figure waved his hand indifferently and turned to leave. Russell was stunned. "You're leaving just like that? What else? You can handle the rest yourself, right?" The phantom turned around and said, "Seriously, next is the most important time for kinship." "Huh. Today is the first time my silly boy is forging. It's as important as the school's parent-teacher conference. How can I be late?" Chapter 606. In the face of such a serious reason, Russell found himself speechless. The illusory figure had dissipated again, turning into a pitch-black bird. It spread its wings and nimbly passed through layers of blockades and defenses. It flew across a long distance and returned to the sky of the ivory tower. After finding the right position, it fell down. It penetrated through layers of walls. It descended from the sky and came to the tightly sealed alchemy workshop. Then it saw the riot of darkness. Despair was shrinking. Under the transformation of the alchemy fire and the hand of imprisonment, it gradually changed qualitatively and took shape again. In Weischer's hand, between his 5 fingers that had turned into steel, the originally heavy iron ingot had condensed into an illusory outline, which he held tightly. In the forger's furnace, the source substance, and the iron began to transform again. Gradually, it became clearer and clearer. The outline of a sharp blade appeared. At that moment, the countless despair that was madly multiplying and spreading in the air suddenly shook. Then it was pulled by an invisible force, collapsing and contracting inwardly. The sharp sound of steel growing burst forth. In Weischer's hand, the metal crystal was multiplying, moving forward and extending rapidly. Despair was given a body, hatred was given a blade, and curses were given a form. The darkness disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye, and with the burning of the alchemy fire, in Weischer's hand, a pitch-black sharp blade finally appeared with its own ferocious outline. The wail of the secret instrument cracking spread. The sharp aura came from it, and in the blink of an eye, it brought a chilling sense of oppression. It was as if there were tangible slashes bursting out from the ground and walls. Oh. Usually, Dew did not care about the sharp aura leaking from the secret instrument. He widened his eyes and stepped forward, almost lying in front of the boundary, staring at the weapon in Weischer's hand. How fierce, how wonderful! A sharp blade that can compete with the Muramesa. Is this the technology left behind by the forgers? The old man's eyes burned with fanatical flames, staring at the sharp blade in Weischer's hand that was gradually dimming. He was so excited that he almost danced with joy. In the flowing darkness, a cold and slender blade appeared from Weischer's hand and extended forward. After crossing an exaggerated scale, it outlined a sharp outline. That was a tachi, but even if it was a tachi, this length was too exaggerated. With just a glance, Yi Zichen was able to get the exact data. 7 feet 9 inches 6 fun. The old alchemist's eyes swept across the blade, staring at every detail on it. Is this the shape of the Imperial God Sword? It's truly an eye-opener. However, before he could finish his sentence, a cracking sound was heard from Weischer's hand. Everyone froze in place. In Weischer's hand, the odachi, which was astonishingly long, had actually shattered. It broke from the middle, and then shattered into thousands of pieces, flying in all directions, quickly blurring and dimming. In the end, it disappeared without a trace. Ping Du stood rooted to the ground, as if he had been petrified. He found it hard to accept such an outcome. Failed. Failed. No, it's the opposite. In the corner, Fei Niao's silhouette smiled. It's a success. At that moment, Huaisher finally raised his hand. The banner unfolded, and the bone-burying sanctuary opened with a bang. The billowing darkness, accompanied by the overwhelming tide of steel crows, roared out. But this time, the crow tide that blotted out the sky and covered the earth no longer reflected the metallic light. Instead, it had returned to the chaotic darkness of the past. However, this darkness was far too ferocious. The once desperate frenzy emerged again. The steel crows spread their wings, and their bodies were wrapped in a substantial darkness. Their scarlet eyes were full of ferocity. When they hissed, the sharp sound tore through the fragile protection and spread in all directions. Greedy predation. In the blink of an eye, within hundreds of meters of the entire laboratory, all the abyssal sediment, all the unknown things, and all the creeping erosive species lurking in the shadows were completely devoured by the crows. And when Huaisher raised his hand, the mighty tide of crows gathered. After the shackles of the form were undone, countless heavy steel feathers fell and returned to Huaisher's hand again. The texture of the feathers overlapped, forming a complicated and solemn blade pattern. The blade that grew and extended like a machine formed a slender arc. The ferocious blade appeared again. The curse turned into a fierce blood color flowing on the blade from top to bottom, dripping and spreading, and finally dissipating in the air. Scarlet marks were left behind. It's a success. Huaisher waved the ferocious iron in his hand and smiled happily. But when he looked back, he saw that his students were retreating in horror. Only the old Pingsher raised his head and stood in place excitedly, staring at the evil spirit in his eyes. That's right, it was the ferocious ghost walking in the human world. It was unaware of how terrible it was at the moment, and even smiled. It walked forward in the bloody shroud, holding a sharp blade that slaughtered lives. It was just like the legendary king of the great rivers and mountains strolling on the road of the capital of peace, killing and destroying everything. Stepping on the corpses, it brought despair. That would be too wonderful. Name. His lips trembled with excitement, and he couldn't wait to step forward, wanting to know, does it have a name? Mr. Huaisher. Huaisher froze for a moment and looked down at the weapon in his hand. Name? On the blade, there were vague and ancient characters appearing. It was the blessing left by the former forgers. In the world, only Huaisher could understand the language. If it was described in the language of the present, there were only 4 words: birth, old age, illness, death. This was the essence born from endless despair. Resentment. Next to him, a familiar voice sounded. Let's call it resentment. Dead silence came in an instant. A strange figure appeared beside Huaisher, took the odachi from his hand, waved it twice, and nodded happily. For a novice, this is a rare and excellent result. Well done, Huaisher. Yuan's eyes widened, stunned and in disbelief. Who was that woman? Why did she seem to be very familiar with her teacher? They even put their arms around each other's shoulders. And she wanted to be close to Huaisher. She subconsciously reached out to touch her waist, but found that she didn't bring Yamagata with her when she went out. Even Huaisher was stunned, looking at Tanguy in front of him. He didn't know why she suddenly appeared in front of others. But when she looked over with a smile, he felt helpless. Well, she probably came out to play when she was in the mood. Then Tanguy raised her hand and snapped her fingers. Time seemed to freeze in an instant. She pressed the pause button. She turned around and looked at Huaisher mischievously. What's wrong? You look like you saw a ghost. No, I'm just not used to you appearing outside. Huaisha shook his head and looked around. Is it okay? What if it is? Tangi leaned closer and looked into his eyes. It may be very troublesome if the news is leaked. Will you help me kill her? You're daydreaming. Huaisha rolled his eyes. You're hopeless. Just wait for death. Goodbye. All right, let's stop joking around. As your contractor, this is the first time you've created such an excellent product, so I have to share it with you. Toheim lowered her head as she fiddled with the Odachi grudge, which was a head taller than her. She commented excitedly, I can give you full marks for the usage of the alchemy fire and the confinement hand, but the forger's furnace isn't something that's easy to use. If there's a slight mistake, it can be considered inexperience, but it can be made up for. The final result, without a doubt, is a top grade. She looked up and looked at the man in front of her with a gratified smile. Congratulations. Why sure, you are already an excellent alchemist. It's still far from that. Huaisha shook his head. You said it yourself. It's resentment, right? It's not despair. Although the result was still excellent, it was still a little short of perfection. It couldn't be restrained from radiating resentment into restrained despair. It was a loss of purity. This point can be made up for in the future. The forger's skill is better than the alchemist's in that it can continuously improve on the work. It's not like the alchemists, where the final result is determined the moment it comes out of the furnace. Tangi sighed. Also, don't make a mistake about who you're comparing to. Why sure? Whether it's the Ivory Tower, the Iron Crystal Throne, or the Stoneforge Society, the alchemists you've seen are all geniuses among geniuses. They are 1 in a million, and there are even alchemists who are unattainable. It's not wrong to have high standards, but if your eyes are always looking up, living will be very tiring. You didn't go through a lot of practice and tempering since you were young, and you don't have the enormous amount of effort they poured into pursuing miracles. To be able to stand side by side with them with your mediocre talent in alchemy is already enough to show how precious your results are. As she spoke, the Odachi in Tangi's hand once again scattered into countless feathers and disappeared into the air. Huaisha felt another fierce origin substance equipment appear in his soul. Huaisha was stunned, and he couldn't help but frown. How is it? You should have noticed it by now, right? Tangi asked. Huaisha nodded. It wasn't just the Odachi. Almost all of the weapons, including the Rage Axe, still had the energy to go one step further. What shocked him was that he had originally thought that the Virtuous Sword would have the highest degree of completion among all of the Origin Substance equipment. But now it seemed that it was the Rope of Sorrow. Not only that, but in terms of degree of completeness, the Rope of Sorrow was just a step away from completely becoming a physical relic. Even after Huaisha died, it would still be able to continue existing. It was hard to understand, but it was indeed different from the other weapons. Huaisha finally remembered the spoils of war he had obtained in Yamatai City. When he had accepted Kitten's request to kill the other princes, it had been given to him as an advance payment. It was a chain that had fused with the Rope of Sorrow. Chapter 607. What the hell is this? Huaisha raised his hand, and the heavy chain emerged from the void. It was shrouded in sparks and black smoke, and its outline appeared. It had already completely merged with his source equipment, and there was no distinction between them. Just this one item made the completion of the sorrowful rope far ahead of other weapons. Even the tachi of resentment that Huaisha had created using the creator's memories could not catch up. It was because of this that Huaisha was extremely surprised. An invitation from Helios. Tangi said, it's the starting point of the alchemist's pilgrimage. Basically, every alchemist should have heard of its existence and have some fear and longing for it. Even a great grandmaster can do it. Even a great grandmaster grew up step by step from an apprentice, right? Tangi thought for a moment and said, As far as I know, Mikhail did not accept Helios' invitation, but another great Grand Master of the Stone Cauldron Society, Garland, did go. Anyway, the chain you got from Kitten is a mission item. Once triggered, it will generate a legendary mission called Helios's Wish. Huaishir's expression twitched. Kitten, that bastard. All the mission rewards given were F*King props from other missions, thinking about it carefully, whether it was the identity card, the Nibelungen, or the chain. None of them were freaking easy. At that time, he was so happy that he thought he had taken advantage of it, but he did not expect that this bastard had sold him out. Fortunately, he had taken back the title of prince, so it was not too much of a loss. But no matter what, he would have to settle this account with Kitten in the future. After scratching his head, Huaishir let out a long breath and calmed down. So, Helios' invitation is a chain? To be precise, it is a puzzle that is casually scattered across the entire realm, casually squandering miracles like rain. The invitation itself is a perfect relic carrier, an empty shell. After saying that, Tangi smiled. Before that, let's talk about Helios. Helios Workshop, Helios War Chariot. You know anything about them? One of the legendary top 10 workshops. Huaishir scratched his head and said, it's even one of the top few workshops, but not many people know about it. That's why you're still too biased in this subject. This should be common knowledge for alchemists. Well then, let's start from the beginning. Tangi leaned back and sat on the invisible sofa and chair as if she had fallen to the ground. She put on a comfortable posture and began to speak, ignoring the fact that Huaishir was still standing there in a daze. And Huaishir was not to be outdone. He sneered, sat back in the air, and leaned back on the invisible chair. He even crossed his legs, leaned back comfortably, and crossed his arms. Even Tangi froze in place, stunned. How did you do it? Horse stance. After a long time, Huaishir squeezed out a few words from between his teeth and looked away awkwardly. His face was already red. Puffed, ha 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 ha. Tangi was already laughing unceremoniously. She was almost wiping her tears. She leaned forward and back and was overjoyed. Forget it, forget it. You'd better sit here. This is the first time someone has done the horse stance in front of me. I can't go on at all. As she spoke, she pointed to the empty air beside her. Huaishir propped himself up with one leg and finally breathed a sigh of relief. Then he looked at the air beside Tangi and reached out to touch it. He vaguely felt the touch of a sofa. He pressed twice, and it was indeed a sofa. What's the principle behind this? Invisible things and visible things. It's just a little alchemy trick. Don't look at it. You won't be able to learn it. Tangi rested her chin on her elbow and smiled. Huaishir thought for a while and sat down tentatively. He sat firmly, right beside her. Then he felt a little stiff. Aren't you going to sit closer? Tangi looked at him and asked curiously, You're almost sitting outside, right? Nonsense. Huaishir sat upright and looked straight ahead. Are you still going to speak? He shouldn't have sat here. It felt more tiring than the horse stance. Okay, where were we just now? So you're just teasing me, right? Huaishir reminded her, unhappily, Helios. Yes, Helios. As if ignoring what happened, Tangi leaned on the armrest that only she enjoyed and said lazily, It's indeed one of the top 10 workshops, but in essence, it doesn't belong to anyone. It doesn't even have any resident alchemists. It's a miracle that can put itself above countless alchemists, a relic that once belonged to the authority of Olympus. Some may think that it's the chariot of Helios, the sun god, but in fact, it's Helios himself. You understand? Huaishir looked at her blankly and quickly looked away. What do you mean? It means that Helios, the god, doesn't exist at all. It's the legendary sun chariot of Apollo. It's the carrier of the sun that was once cast by the Olympian gods. It once represented the authority of the sun, the miracle of Olympus. Is this clear enough? Huaishir was stunned for a long time and finally reacted. Yes, that's why it could continue to exist after the fall of the gods. From its nature, you can think of it as a cosmic space station that operates in the orbit of the solar system, flying in the cold universe. Every 71 years, it will cross the orbit of Earth, allowing alchemists to visit it. Although this huge scale of space is meaningless, it does imitate the movement of the sun, and thus obtains a huge amount of power. It's not an exaggeration to call it the incarnation of the sun. It's a war weapon created by the Olympian gods to deal with the danger of hell. It's said that a superweapon that can destroy a continental plate with one hit. Isn't it awesome? It doesn't sound real. Would the Astronomical Society allow such a thing to exist? Of course not. But long before the Astronomical Society was established, long before the fall of the Astronomical Society, it was damaged by a passing bad thing. So, foreigners are not good people, no matter how enthusiastic they are. There should be a limit. If those guys had been a little vigilant, it wouldn't have ended up like this. Huaishir did not understand the second half of the sentence at all, but it was not the first time that Tangi talked to herself like this. He just treated it as the dark history of Olympus. In other words, Helios is currently in a damaged state. Almost 90% of its functions are gone. Tangi shrugged. So, Helios' remaining instinct chose to repair itself. But unfortunately, Hephaestus no longer exists, so it can only be done by others. That's why there are invitations. Through its own orbit, every time it gets close to the sun, it produces a large number of semi-finished products in batches, and then throws them to the present and hell to generate a large number of invitations. Any alchemist who wants to set foot on Helios can modify the invitation and record the miracle of their smelting in the blank relics. It's like continuing your own creation on a half-completed painting. As long as you can achieve a perfect rating, you will be regarded as a guest worthy of being invited by Helios and get the qualification to go on Helios. And then you have to undertake the maintenance work. Tangi said with a calm face, "They are looking for someone to repair the sewer pipe. Do you think they will invite you for tea? But for any alchemist, being able to come into contact with the creation of the gods is already a great opportunity, not to mention being able to participate in it. If you can finish the work within a month of the intersection of the tracks, then you can get off the train with a thank you gift. If you can't, then you have to finish your part. But once the train stops, it's not easy to get off. Do you understand?" Huaishir swallowed his saliva. Think about it. An alchemist was carried by a cold chariot, sailing in the cold universe, separated from everything by the vast darkness and despair. And the present, far away, on the scale of astronomy, waiting for the next meeting after 70 years. If you ask me, some alchemists can't wait to stay a little longer. Tangi shrugged. They don't want to get off the train when they arrive at the station, so they deliberately stay there. Over time, because of the research on Helios, a group has formed inside, which is what we call the Helios Workshop. But the only one who can really represent the Helios Workshop is Helios itself. Then after so many years, is there any progress in the maintenance? About 30%. Tangi said indifferently. The material is rare. Sometimes Helios' own projections are like taxis working everywhere in hell, so it's not surprising to meet them. The moment you put it that way, it really lowers my status. Anyway, this is your chance. Tangi's words made Huaishir's heart skip a beat. You've received their gifts for so long, I'm afraid you're already on the list, right? I have to go up and fix the water pipes. Huaishir's eyes widened. What are you afraid of? with the skills of the forger, you won't have to worry about not being able to fix it when the tracks of Helios converge a year later. Tangi glanced at him. Besides, there's still a year. A year later, you might be at grade 5. Don't say that advancing to grade 5 is as easy as eating and drinking, okay? I'm only at grade 3. Huaishi's eyes widened. Moreover, you force me to advance by 1 grade, so I need more experience than others for no reason. Don't worry, as long as Dakun has a breakthrough, young Arbiter Ming's destiny will grow very quickly. As for Great Arbiter Ming, you've killed countless people in hell and exterminated an entire hell. How many correction points did you get? As long as you use the secret method to convert it, you'll be able to skip the early and middle stages and directly jump to the late stages. When the materials for advancement are more or less prepared, you can consider advancing to grade 4. Tangi counted with her fingers and patted Huaishi's shoulder proudly. Look at how meticulous your sister's plans are. Yeah, you're really meticulous. From the beginning to the end, you've arranged everything clearly. Huaishi rolled his eyes. Tangi leaned closer and smiled. Are you angry? Huaishi looked away and leaned back. I'll fall if I move any further. I'll get into a horse stance. Huaishi held his breath angrily and squeezed out the words from between his teeth. Tangi's laughter became even more joyful. All right, it's almost time. I'll go back first. She reached out and pulled Huaishi up from the ground. You're already a teacher. Don't be so childish. Huaishi sighed and waved his hand, indicating for her to leave quickly. But Tangi stayed where she was and looked at him. Suddenly, she said, There's one more thing that I haven't told you. Huaishi was puzzled. She reached out her hand and ruffled Huaishi's hair with lightning speed before he could react. Her smile was bright and dazzling. You've grown, Huaishi, she said. Congratulations. Huaishi was stunned. Then goodbye. She winked at the contractor in front of her and turned to leave. Her figure disappeared into the air. Soon, the frozen time resumed its flow. It was as if everyone had forgotten about the illusion that disappeared and did not notice that they had lost 10 minutes. They only saw Huaishi standing where he was thoughtfully and looking in another direction. He was silent and did not speak. Teacher Lin Shurgio looked at Huaishi in confusion and reminded him softly, Are you okay? Ah, sorry, I was stunned for a moment. Huaishi came back to his senses and smiled at them. I remembered something happy. In the silence, Yuan looked at that smile and felt sad for no reason. Du was still standing quietly in the corner. His stooped body was stiff and he was already sweating. He did not know what had happened at all, but he felt a stinging pain in his eyes. It was as if for a moment the tyrannical sun had descended here and coldly ravaged the pair of eyes that had seen too many miracles. It left a deep burn mark in his eyes like the sun. It did not even give him a reason to be afraid. It just indifferently gave him a punishment. Tell him, you should bow down. Chapter 608. All in all, Huaishi was in a very good mood now. Although he didn't admit that he was very happy to be praised by his big sister, in any case, getting a new weapon was something worth celebrating. However, the weapon didn't feel real just by holding it in his hand. Therefore, of course, he had to find someone to test it on. Then, there was a problem. Huaishi wasn't crazy enough to find students in the school in the middle of the night to randomly kill. The records in the Book of Destiny were enough for practice, but it didn't give Huaishi too much pressure. Therefore, he could only find someone from the people around him. Yuan. He looked at the girl in the gray skirt behind him, who was unhappy for some reason, and immediately felt a pain in his conscience. Why, sure, what are you thinking? That's your student. Then, Lin Shurjo, therefore, the little hut in the forest inexplicably trembled under the teacher's loving gaze and squeezed out a smile with difficulty. Why, sure, also squeezed out a smile. Then he sighed. Forget it. She looked pitiful and couldn't fight very well. Bullying little Sergio didn't have any sense of existence. Then there was only one choice among the acquaintances in the school. He took out his phone, opened the address book, and then dialed a number. Hello. He smiled and asked, Is Raymond there? Bullseye, see, before the flail with a strange accent could speak halfway. It was snatched by Raymond. Hello? What's the matter? I just remembered that you were discharged from the hospital. Weischer lowered his head and smiled at the bloody long knife in his hand. I arranged a rehabilitation exercise for you. Awesome. Half an hour later, Raymond, who was taken to the overhead classroom, was still holding a hamburger in his hand. He looked at Weischer, who had already begun to warm up, and was stunned. I saw you ready to hit me as soon as I came in, he asked in surprise. You call this rehabilitation exercise? It's just exercise, Weischer said with a smile. Isn't it because I'm afraid that you'll get sick from boredom? Besides, with your skills, you shouldn't be afraid of this, right? I'm just a driver. Don't spout nonsense. He looked at Lin Sergio and Yuan and said, Hey, are you going to use me to teach the students? I'm warning you, I will complain. How long had it been since Jacob had been dragged to the guillotine? You still have a conscience? He's still watching you from the Capitol. Sorry, I didn't want to do that, but he's just too weak. Weischer said, Don't worry, I'm just trying out my new weapon. I can't bully a student, right? Is it okay to bully me? You borrowed money from me last time and then bet on my business. Are you going to consider sharing some with me? Sorry, the wind was too loud. I didn't hear you clearly, Raymond replied with a serious face. He raised his hand and patted his shoulder. Isn't it just a sparring partner? Come, ravage me mercilessly. He finished his hamburger in a few bites, then took off his leather jacket and threw it to Lin Sergio. Then he entered the venue in a singlet. Muscles. When the leather jacket was taken off, anyone would notice Raymond's muscles. They weren't exaggerated. In fact, they weren't very developed. However, the division and combination of the muscles, the scars on them, and the flexibility and ease of control were enough to make one feel a sense of valiance. Between his 5 fingers, the muscles in his palms jumped flexibly. As his body warmed up, the muscles all over his body rippled like water. Heat was rising because his body temperature was rising. This was different from the drummers and used Stepp's origin substance application technique. In a literal sense, it increased the body's heat and increased the supply from the source, thereby exploding with a powerful force. Elder Luo's explanation was very thorough. There were only so many techniques in the world. The basic techniques were the straight punch, the jab, the kick, and so on. No matter how strange the techniques developed from this foundation, in the end, they all came from the same source. For example, the performance technique itself was through the changes in rhythm and weapons, reinterpreting the music. However, it was still built on the combination of the drummer and used steps. For example, the heretic king, who was so strong that he was unreasonable, all he needed was a serious punch to break through a city. No matter how many changes there were, it still remained the same. The drummer and used steps focused on the use of muscles. Thus, after combining them, one could freely control the muscles all over the body and enter a state beyond the limit. The technique that Redmond was displaying was to increase the supply of heat to his body. Through the strengthening of his body, he was able to vent out the heat from his body. One was to increase the efficiency of the utilization. and the other was to increase the upper limit of the output. Of course, both sides took care of each other, but the main point was still different. If one wanted to have both, then they were destined to fail. Making a choice was the wisest method for an ascender at this stage. Raymond's warm-up posture and movements had already exceeded Huaishir's expectations, raising him to the level of a powerful enemy. There was even a faint shadow of a certain person, the existence on the Ivy League flagship that gave Huaishir immense pressure. The level 4 Jura Everly. "You're really close to the Eye of Nightmares," Huaishir exclaimed. "Not at all. It's just some basic skills that can be seen everywhere. Don't worry about it." Raymond waved his hand with a smile. "Shouldn't we announce the rules first? If you pull out that pistol, I'll immediately lie on the ground and surrender, then write a report letter." "Don't worry. Beelzebub probably doesn't have time now." Huaishir looked up and glanced at the Lord of the Flies, who was happily talking to Lien Shackle outside the arena. He could not help but shake his head. "Can we fight with weapons without using stigmata and soul power? Isn't that still bullying? How many weapons do you have? Besides, what's that move called? Whether it's Cord or Xiang Dragon, it's not something you can take out, right?" "Don't worry. Just one today." Huaishir opened the burial sanctuary with a smile. In the overwhelming crow tide, a blood-colored crow feather Tachi slowly grew out. It was a terrifyingly long sword, hatred. Thus, under the blood-colored shroud, the ferocious ghost god reappeared. "It's useless to say more." He said, "Let's begin." Raymond was dumbfounded. He did not understand why Huaishir suddenly changed his style and became a ferocious solidifier. He pointed to Huaishir's side in disbelief. "Wait, it's fine if you hit me, but why did you call Andrea to watch?" Huaishir frowned and wanted to turn around, but there was no one behind him. It was at that moment that a loud sound burst out. It was like a burning chariot advancing in an instant. The earth shook, and Raymond was already close. The heavy halberd pulled out from the empty classroom, slashed down, and pure, enormous power operated in it. His movements were unbelievably fast. At this moment, he was the incarnation of the chariot of fate. The halberd roared. It pierced through Huaishir's chest, tore the bones, and dug out a big, hideous hole. Killed in one blow. The first round was over. Huaishir lowered his head in a daze, looked at the gap in his chest, and then looked at the middle-aged, muscular man in front of him. "Wow, you're so despicable in a spar. Going all out is respecting the opponent." Raymond pulled out the halberd, slowly retreated 20 steps away, and hooked his finger at Huaishir. "Come on, hero. Isn't this a rehabilitation exercise? You have to do something exciting, right? That's what you said." Huaishir sighed and twisted his neck. A cracking sound was heard as the joints rubbed against each other. Then he suddenly disappeared on the spot. It was not that Huaishir had disappeared. It was that he was too fast. Raymond was engulfed by a chill. He subconsciously wanted to retreat, but the hideous smile bathed in blood was already close at hand. Raven feather Tachi, hatred swept across. In a flash, Huaishir appeared behind Raymond. The blood on the blade dripped and dissipated in the air. The second round was over. A red line suddenly appeared on Raymond's neck. Then it broke cleanly and fell to the ground, still blinking blankly. It was hard to understand. The severed head's lips were still moving. "Why are you so fast?" Huaishir lowered his head and looked at his broken trousers and his swollen calf. He looked back at him and showed the same gentle smile as Luo Xian. "This skill is very simple," he said. "Just do it when the air is not paying attention." "What the hell?" Raymond opened his eyes wide. He even forgot to pick up his head from the ground. He finally felt the same sense of sluggishness as "Why sure? Are you stupid, stinky brother?" This was the Orchard School's secret technique, taking advantage when XX is not paying attention. In fact, it was just the 5 steps of you that surpassed Why sure's limit. In the end, he didn't even touch the edge of Senior Sister. His kneecaps were already broken. If it weren't for the empty classroom, he would probably have to go back and rest for a long time. But this would also lose the meaning of sparring, right? The empty classroom restarted. Why sure returned to the original place, stretched his body, and entered the state of exceeding the limit again. He hooked his finger at Raymond. Again. In silence, Raymond touched his neck, took a deep breath, held up the heavy halberd again, and assumed a charging posture. A short sword quietly appeared at his waist. He began to get serious. The ground cracked again. The chariot started and rumbled forward. The hurricane came with the halberd. The strong wind had already stung Why sure's face from a distance. The Tachi swept and slashed. Then there was a burst of thunder. Ha! Raymond's flushed face suddenly opened, and he let out a roar like a lion. It was as if there was a physical wave of air mixed with the fluctuations of origin substance. It shook one's consciousness, forming a frightening aura comparable to that of thunder. If it were a normal person, their origin substance would have been destroyed by this roar, and they would have been turned into a vegetable. Why sure's movements, however, only paused for a moment. A moment was more than enough. The halberd instantly shattered the Tachi's sweep. Raymond closed in, and he let go of the halberd. His left hand pulled out a short sword from his waist, and in this moment of crisis, stabbed towards Why sure's heart. Bang! The sharp sound of metal scraping against metal could be heard. Sparks flew. Raymond's pupils dilated. The Tachi in Why sure's hand, which was originally incomparably long, had shrunk to the size of a wakizashi. He raised it from his hand, blocking the incoming dagger. Immediately afterwards, Why sure raised his right hand, and his 5 fingers clenched tightly. The heavenly drum sounded. Raymond's body slid backwards, and the imprint of a fist appeared on his raised arm. "I forgot to tell you." Why sure smiled slightly. "The length can be adjusted, and by the way, amidst the sharp sound of growing iron crystals, the blood-colored katana in his hand suddenly extended forward. After crossing a long distance, it pierced straight through Raymond's chest and came out from his back. Then, Why sure's voice followed closely behind. Its maximum length is 9 meters. Chapter 609. Imperial Divine Blade. Hatred. The weight of 3 strokes, 5 caddies, 1 tail, 6 centimeters, remained constant. Normally, the blade was 6 feet long, but according to the user's will, it could freely extend and contract between 4 inches and 119 feet, 3 inches, and 1 minute. It was truly a must-have item for traveling, killing people, and gifting to friends and family. Those who received it were usually moved to the point of tears. Just like right now, Raymond was already shedding tears of grief and indignation. After piercing through his opponent's body like a bolt of lightning, it quickly retracted and returned to Why sure's hand, returning to the length of a normal blade. It was the most suitable size for Why sure to use. As expected, this was the best. Unfortunately, the blade didn't manage to pierce through Su Chen's heart. Su Chen's hidden trump card had been seen through at the last moment. It had probably pierced through his lungs, but his organs hadn't been damaged. To an ascended cultivator, this wasn't a big deal. Unfortunately, Raymond was somewhat flustered as he covered his wound, missing the opportunity to counterattack. He quickly realized that this was a virtual classroom, so he didn't have to worry about the curse in his body leaking out. He shook his head self-mockingly and sighed in relief. His eyes, however, were filled with tears. He couldn't help it. This was because the pain he felt wasn't from the blade's wound, but rather from the infection caused by the poisonous origin substance in his chest. It wasn't the hatred within Huai Shi's origin substance, but rather some sort of natural reaction. It was some sort of pain left over from the past. He had been a motherless child since he was young, wandering the borders, risking his life for so many years without any good results. In order to save his partner, he had even become a traitor. He didn't have much time left and was about to die, but he still had a large loan that he couldn't repay. He had no choice but to stay in the ivory tower as a tool. He had finally managed to ask for leave to travel, but when he returned, he was cut down. This kind of life was so shameful, so empty, and so meaningless. Birth, old age, sickness, and death. Living was just too painful. He wanted to die. He wanted to involuntarily throw himself in front of that blade and let it end his life, just like he had done to the samurai, bringing his last bit of dignity with him as he cut off his head. Everything was over. He wanted to be free. When Raymond finally realized what was going on, he looked at Huai Shi with tears in his eyes, which were full of shock and fear. "Where did you get such an evil thing?" Huai Shi looked down at the knife in his hand and thought for a moment. "Someone gave it to you. You like it?" "I like it." He loved it to death. She loved him so much that she wanted to die. How dare you force a middle-aged man to recall his dark past? Raymond raised his hand and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, ignoring the tears in his eyes. How dare you use such a dirty thing on a lowly social animal? Are you ready to pay the price? Although the corners of his mouth still carried a trace of his usual frivolous smile, his eyes had become tranquil. It was as silent as iron. Without a doubt, he became serious. Huai Shi thought for a moment and said seriously, "If I have offended you in any way, I can apologize." "No need, because you will regret it very soon." Enveloped by the heat, Raymond, who had been burned red, grinned. His blood turned into mist and rose into the air. In an instant, he was within reach. Iron light and hurricane swept across. A roar burst forth. It was as if an angry, heavy truck had crashed head-on with a hurricane, crushing the walls, obstacles, and everything else that was not worth mentioning. Huai Shi slid back more than 10 meters. The resentment in his hand kept shaking. The web between his thumb and index finger holding the knife cracked, and wisps of blood seeped out. But it was not over. Raymond's movements did not stop at all. He had already pounced on him again. The halberd was straight and stabbed forward. Huai Shi's leaned back body lowered unbelievably. Then, as if his muscles were contracting, he rubbed against the halberd like a spring full of power and pounced forward. You step, a flat stab. He was entangled. The iron ball covered with barbs was thrown out with iron chains and wrapped around the blade of Huai Shi's sword. It pulled violently, and the instantaneous burst of power caused the blade to deviate. Raymond held the halberd with one hand and took out a flail with the other hand, locking the counterattack sword. At a very close distance, he smiled at Huai Shi. "I'll show you the skills of the wild dog of war." As he spoke, he raised his head and smashed forward like a hammer, hitting Huai Shi's head, causing his vision to turn black, and he lost his vision for a moment. But the resentment had already broken free from its restraints and shattered the iron chains. In this darkness where nothing could be seen, it broke the halberd in Raymond's hand by relying on the sound of the wind. The heavy weapon split into two from the middle, but when Huai Shi opened his eyes, Raymond had already pulled out a brand new weapon from the empty classroom. It was so familiar in shape. It was the Teuton greatsword that was exactly the same as Avery's. With the heavy sword in hand, Raymond's aura became more and more violent. In the state of blood ignition, he raised the sword high and slashed down at Huaishir's head. Justice descends from the heavens. Steel intersected in the air and rubbed against each other. Sparks burst out and illuminated the eyes of the two. The hurricane whistled past. Then, everything returned to silence. It came to an abrupt end. Huaishir's right arm, which had been cut off by the heavy sword, fell to the ground, but his head wasn't chopped off as expected. Instead, the blade that pierced through Raymond's head was still between blood and bone. In the third round, the outcome was decided. The empty classroom was reset. But the thrilling moment just now still lingered in Huaishir's body and hadn't dissipated. He had underestimated the threat of Raymond's explosive state and had almost been killed by a series of consecutive moves. Although his speed and strength had increased qualitatively in the explosive state of blood ignition, that set of well-tempered attacks was flawless. He was in a stable and invincible position. In the worst-case scenario, they would just perish together. If it wasn't for the fact that the blade could retract freely, he wouldn't be able to make it in time, even if he exceeded the limit. In a daze, he almost thought that the person standing in front of him was that old man, Avery, who had walked out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. With the reset, Raymond appeared 20 steps away again. He twisted his neck happily and sighed softly. It's been a long time since I've had such a good fight. It's rare for me to be in such a good mood. Do you mind if I increase the difficulty for you? Please. Huaishir nodded. Thus, Raymond's hand swiped through the preset list of the empty classroom. Not long after, a full set of heavy armor, including his face, was included. There were still traces of swords and sabers on the heavy armor. The overlapping blood color dyed it black and red. There was a round shield fixed on the right arm, but the eye of nightmare emblem on it had been hung off with a sharp blade. What was left was only the faint outline of the dragon descendant knight. On the majestic lion helmet, 2 blazing breaths slowly exhaled. A pair of dark green eyes opened, carrying a smile and malevolence. How I missed the feeling of being young. There was no doubt that after returning to his peak and removing the influence of the curse, his body was as light as a dream. Come, let's start the class, Teacher Huaishir. He twisted his neck happily and hooked his finger at the enemy in front of him. The students are still watching. Don't hesitate for too long. Are you so cooperative? Huaishir's resentment shook off the remaining blood on the blade. After pondering for a moment, he finally raised his head and smiled. Then, let's talk about armor break in this lesson. The limit was activated. Amidst the rumbling, the blade of resentment, which had increased in size, whizzed over. An hour later, the sound of violent collisions in the empty classroom finally came to an abrupt end. When the empty scene dissipated, both of them were covered in sweat. It was a hearty spar and duel. But towards the end, even if they weren't afraid of death in the empty simulation, there wasn't much to gain from fighting. Thanks to Raymond's cooperation, Huaishir already knew the effects and various parameters of the Royal Divine Blade, resentment. As for the following cooperation between the young arbiter of life's stigmata and resentment, as well as the hidden changes, Raymond didn't want to be a target anymore. Every time he was hit, he would be forced to recall his own dark history. The shame and helplessness of wanting to die was unbearable. For the enemy, the effect of this blade was too despicable. Young people who hadn't experienced much might be less affected, but the more experienced they were, the harder it was for them to resist the helplessness and pain of life and death and pray for relief. After being hit, what they felt wasn't resentment, but a desire for death. If Raymond's feeling wasn't wrong, that blade should still have the effect of swallowing origin substance, but in essence, it was targeting his stigmata. It was just that the stigmata data in the empty classroom was fixed and couldn't affect it. That saber was alive. He could conclude that there was absolutely no mistake about this. Huaishur didn't deny this. When he waved his hand and dispersed resentment, the blade once again disintegrated into countless steel feathers and returned to the sacred burial ground. After being forged and smelted, the despair that had condensed into steel had been given to the entire flock of crows. At the same time, resentment had become the incarnation of the flock of crows. The casting of the same origin made this fusion so easy. Now, the fierce blade was the sharp claws of the flock of crows. In accordance with their instinctive desire for evolution, they were endowed with insatiable hunger and greed, and even dared to feed on disasters and miracles. This was the gift that the Sunmaker had left for Huaishur. As long as he accepted the Sunmaker's inheritance, there would be a grand path in front of him. The only problem was Huaishur scratched his head, feeling at a loss. Where the hell was he going to find so many ascenders and consolidators for them to eat? Chapter 6:10. These days it was getting harder and harder to raise crow. Huaishur actually started to reminisce about the past like an old man, thinking about how simple it was before he evolved. He just had to show them a couple of paragraphs from his book of destiny every now and then. They would be very satisfied with that. But now, even small tomes couldn't satisfy them anymore. They wanted other people's lives. As for the one that liked to turn into a human and play with him recently, it wanted his life. Every time he saw a long list of deductions, Huaishur's heart would ache. If this continued, he suspected that he wouldn't be able to live for long. No matter how big his family business was, it couldn't be ruined like this. Huaishur didn't feel sad for long, because in the cage of dreams, the crow that hadn't eaten the origin substance or the stigmata for a long time had already begun to shout at the top of their lungs again. They wanted a reward. They wanted to watch a short movie from the Book of Destiny, twice a day. That's all I can do. Huaishur flipped through the Book of Destiny for a long time and found a page to send in. In the end, the instinctive praises of the Book of Destiny were strange. Thoughts like, "That's it, so short, one more time," and so on. He didn't know where it had learned this from. He didn't know why, but he felt like a has-been idol being despised by his fans. Life was hard. He sighed and looked away. "Let's go. It's time to eat," he said to Raymond. "It's rare for you to be so cooperative. I'll treat you. Little Yuan, and 19 should come too." "HM?" Raymond, who was about to go back and eat instant noodles, had his eyes light up. He leaned over and asked in a low voice, "I heard that you're a VIP at Kuei-Lu. You're also a VIP at a few restaurants with hell ratings, the kind where you eat for free?" Huaishur couldn't help but roll his eyes. "What are you thinking? They're giving you face. Are you really going to go empty-handed? I'll personally cook soup for you. Do you dare to drink it? As long as it's not a rat, I'm fine with it." Raymond clicked his tongue and sighed. "Don't try to fool me with an ordinary restaurant. I've lost dozens of pounds of blood today, and more than 10 heads have been broken. You're giving me this? All right, come to my house today." Huaishur rolled his eyes. "Remember to eat less. Don't let Feng Shu cook too much." When he heard Raymond mention rats, he thought of the group of park guards that were brought back by the good brother from the legal department. Although it was just a shell, after gaining experience, Kitten would be able to replicate it again. It wouldn't be long before the park's debt collection army would start mass-producing What a Sin. Just as he was shaking his head and sighing, he saw a lonely figure walking out of the school office building. He wore a cyan Ingzhou robe, a braid that did not belong to the era, and a beard that seemed to have experienced the vicissitudes of life. He also had a saber that never left his waist. "Sasaki-kun." His footsteps paused for a moment, and he asked with some concern, Are you okay? Sasaki Kayomesa, the external teacher of the Ingzhou Flower Path classroom, used to be the swordsmanship instructor of the Ingzhou Chinese clan, and fought with Huaisher because of rumors. But he was basically a tough guy without any scheming. It was hard to imagine that he would be so sad. Did something happen in the Flower Path classroom? After a moment of silence, Sasaki showed a relaxed smile. Huaisher, Kun, I'm no longer working in the Flower Path classroom. The next teacher will be the disciple of the Yamanaka professor. Ningzi is a good kid. Please take care of me in the future. Huaisher, Kun. Huaisher was stunned, and Sasaki was about to say something, but he was interrupted by Huaisher. It's time for dinner. Do you want to eat together? He pointed to the person behind him. If you don't mind, let's eat together. I still have half a bottle of good wine from Tengu Mountain at home. Sasaki was stunned and couldn't help but swallow. He wanted to refuse, but the good wine of Tengu Mountain was too fragrant. Then I'll accept it. The so-called friendship between men was just that. Although Sasaki and Raymond weren't familiar with each other before, they had 2 meals together, drank a glass of wine, and chatted. Boers and Boers always had a common language. One talked about racing, and the other talked about Flower Path. After getting drunk, who cared about that? The way they put their arms around each other's shoulders was so intimate that it was as if they were wearing the same pants. At least until they sobered up, they were still sworn brothers. Brother Raymond, you really don't remember anything? At the banquet that lasted from dinner to supper, Sasaki took off the robe that was in the way and nibbled on edamame as he asked curiously, "Don't you have any memory of what happened before you left the present realm?" "Oh, if you want to talk about it, there is a little." Raymond scratched his head and thought for a long time. "I only remember that I seem to be from the Russian Federation. No, I think I'm from Rome. Forget it. I can't remember at all. That's the same as not having any memories." Sasaki slammed the table. "If you ask me, you must be from Ingzhou. When you drink, you have the momentum of a sword master. There are no people with green eyes and yellow hair in Ingzhou." Raymond was confused for a long time. "Besides, I don't remember what the present realm looks like at all. Occasionally, I've only watched some movies, but I don't know much about it. After coming to the Ivory Tower, I've been running around the border. Not to mention Ingzhou, I haven't even been to Asia. Didn't you just say that you went on a trip?" "Yes, I went to Shambhala and had physical therapy there for a few days," Raymond said, and took out his mobile phone to show them. "Why, sure, the scenery of the places you recommended to me is really good." Huaisher looked at him and couldn't help but sigh. "It's really good. I've always wanted to go there once. I have a friend there. It's easy to go there. A round trip every 2 days. It's very fast. Next time?" "Forget it." Huaisher sipped his drink and couldn't help but sigh. "It's meaningless to go there. It's really sad to see a friend lying in the ICU. Besides, that guy doesn't want me to go and see him. He always says that it's too embarrassing. Wait, the one in the bed next to you. Wait, isn't this bastard fine?" He stared at him and leaned over. In the photo on Raymond's mobile phone, why did the slut in the hospital bed next to him look so familiar? "Is this your friend?" Raymond was also stunned. He looked at him and said, "Indeed, people like you should be able to get along well. But is there something wrong with your friend's brain?" At the mention of this, Raymond's expression became complicated, as if he recalled some inexplicable horror. He couldn't help but twitch. "Once I got up in the middle of the night and went to the toilet. I found that he wasn't in his bed. After I came out of the toilet, I found that guy hugging a vending machine and talking. What the hell? A vending machine." Raymond's face turned green when he said this. "You didn't see it. That guy was talking to himself. Not only did he hug it, but he also wanted to kiss it. Sasaki was shocked. Wow, such a powerful pervert is rare even in Ingzhou. Mr. Sasaki, I understand your hometown feelings, but please don't compare everything with Ingzhou, okay? Huaishi's expression had become indescribable. He always felt that something was wrong. Did Mr. Lu's condition get worse during the period of recuperation? He used to think that there was something wrong with his brain, but he didn't expect that there was something wrong with his brain. Should he take some time to see him? However, speaking of which, your friend is really a powerful character. When we first met, he killed people like cutting melons and vegetables. It was completely abnormal. I was almost killed by him. Raymond said with emotion, "Fate is really wonderful." "You've met before?" Huaishir asked curiously. Raymond opened his mouth and was about to speak, but he was stunned for a long time and incredibly sobered up. He didn't say anything else, but made a zipping gesture at the corner of his mouth. Then he lifted his hair and showed him the small mole scar behind his ear. That was the continuing Academy's gag order. Phew, that was close. I almost exploded on the spot. Raymond grabbed the wine bottle and poured it directly. He picked it up and began to drink. "Hurry up and calm me down." Huaishir's mouth twitched, but he didn't feel bad about the wine. He could just go back and bleed a little and then go to Tengu Mountain to exchange for a few more bottles. Compared to this, he was more concerned about the gag order of the continuing academy. The gag order wasn't surprising. Many times, when the Astronomy Association carried out tasks, it would be imposed on the people involved. But the key was the continuing academy. There were basically no survivors of things that could alarm the continuing academy. Even if there were survivors, they would be taken away to live a carefree life in prison. It was a miracle that they could continue to jump around outside. If he had it, did that mean old Lu also had it? He instinctively felt how deep the water behind this was, but he didn't dare to ask again. If he asked too much about the continuing academy, it would be easy to get himself involved. Did you think the silencer's steal was a joke? Everyone wisely acted as if nothing had happened, and everyone continued to drink. When the banquet was about to end, Sasaki pondered for a long time, put down the wine glass, and suddenly got up. He put on his messy clothes, took a few steps back, and bowed. "Thank you for taking care of me in the past," he said solemnly. "Your kindness to me, Sasaki Kayomesa, will remember it in my heart." Huaishir looked at him blankly, unable to understand. "What's the matter, Sasaki-san?" He asked. "Did something happen? Please speak frankly. If I can help, I will not hesitate to help." "I'm not here to ask for help." Sasaki shook his head, straightened his body, and finally said what he had always wanted to say. "In a few days, I will leave the ivory tower." Recalling the past few years in school, it was like a dream. "I can't repay your deep kindness, and I am deeply ashamed." Okay, sit down first and talk slowly." After much persuasion, Huaishir finally managed to pin him down on the chair and asked for the reason. Speaking of this, the lonely look on Sasaki's face was swept away, and he was full of joy. Half a month ago, at the Ingzhou high officials' meeting, the previous impostor was deposed. He said excitedly, "The return of the Rigian family is imminent, and it is said that Miss Hoopa has also set off to return to Nara as a retainer of the Rigian family. How can I stand by at such a critical moment? I must contribute my insignificant strength to the revival of the Rigian family." "What?" Huaishir was stunned. The information was too much, and he couldn't react. The first thought in his mind was, Hoopo's stinky sister is going to be rich. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.